OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
It is 7:31 on this Monday morning. You're very welcome along to OTB AM. Eoin and Nathan with you right the way through until 10 o'clock this morning. Tyrone is where we're heading this morning for our Mt Rushmore series. We're also going to be chatting the GAA's return to play protocols as announced on Friday. And we're also taking a look ahead to the Premier League's resumption. 9 days until British football is back on our TV screens. Nathan Murphy, a very good morning to you.
How are you keeping?
Life feels more normal this morning than it has done at any point over the last 2 months. Is that fair to say?
I just drove to the Knoll. Just to go see all of Dublin. Places in Dublin I've never seen before. And I'm going to spend the latter part of my day on the Wicklow border, making sure none of those people come near Dublin. Stay within your own county.
Well, what about the Greystones and Bray people, and then similarly at the north? What about the Dunboyne people? Like, I mean, they're basically dubs.
We'd let Sean Boylan in. Aside from that, stay in Meath.
Stay in Meath.
Is
exactly.
Tato Park open yet? Do we know this? Is Tato Park open?
Well, I don't know. That's the key point. As soon as Tato Park is allowed to open, then I think the border should become more fluid with Meath.
The boom is back.
Well, I've just realised you're also really in a similar haircut situation to myself this morning since you've appeared on screen. 20th of July, that was the bad news from Friday. We have to go all that way.
I've been debating week on week. It's been getting progressively worse and more out of control. Like, we're talking another six weeks of this. It's just going up and out. I don't know. Maybe I should go with just full on afro and embrace it. The only alternative, it's so long now. I've gone past just a neat little trim and keep it ticking over. I'm just going to have to shave it all off or just keep going. But who knows where it ends up? I might have beautiful flowing locks by the end of this.
That's the thing. People will kill to be in your position. A lot of people will kill to be in your position, Nathan. So embrace the afro for the next couple of weeks. You're one of the people who's still watching the Bundesliga.
The viewing figure is just falling off the edge of a cliff at the moment for the Bundesliga.
Once the Premier League gave the green light to come back, it was like, right, may as well enjoy not watching football for another 2 weeks because we're going to have so much of it over the last... after the end of the season for the 92 games or whatever it is. But yeah, you're still clinging to the Bundesliga even though the title is basically wrapped up.
Well, there was a bit of excitement when the Bundesliga started because for once Bayern Munich hadn't run away with it and it was really tight between the top four and you knew that Bayern had to play Dortmund and as well it was the only football on, so you could really, really get into it. But ever since Bayern beat Dortmund, it's fallen a bit flat. And even at the weekend, you're watching Bayern against Bayer Leverkusen, who've also had a brilliant season. Bayer Leverkusen go 1-0 up, and then Bayern just absolutely demolished them. So it was decent. Suddenly now, you're looking at Bayern Munich, and, well, right now they are the best team in the world. But they're just so much talent in that Bayern Munich side. They're brilliant to watch. It was interesting at the weekend. BT, for the first time, went with crowd noises. So fake crowd noise. I know in America they've been going with this, and there's talk in the Premier League that both Sky and BT are going to give you the option. I quite liked it. I thought when it was proposed, this will not work. And actually, I come around, particularly in that Bayern-Dortmund game, which was of such good quality, to almost enjoying having to concentrate a little bit more because you can't switch off because there's no real indication of a chance coming aside from the commentator. But it worked really, really well, except at times it felt like you could hear some referees' whistles when there were no referees' whistles, right. Because I presume what they've recorded it from, maybe they were there initially. That was a very, very minor thing and didn't notice it too often. But whoever was on sound for BT were pretty good at their job because as the ball went into the area, the crowd noise seemed to rise. And I said this right at the start, unless commentators are going to change the way they commentate on TV, you do need the crowd noise because particularly these days, everybody's second screens. So you're half online, you're half watching the match. And unless you get some indication that something good is about to happen, you're probably going to miss it.
Yeah, it's good.
Now, maybe it's a damning reflection on us as viewers, but that's the way it is.
It's a really good point. I found that it's almost instructive having the crowd noises. That sometimes you can see an opening when you're watching on television and the crowd just seems a little bit more subdued and you're like, okay, there's clearly an offside, there's a flag up here, out of shot or whatever. Whereas with no crowd noises, it's like everything is a chance. If players are playing on beyond even beyond a flag being raised, you're not aware of that. You're not aware of the magnitude of a chance if there's a player outside of your screen coming through, or if there's a bad tackle in particular that you're not quite aware of until you see the replay. You don't really hear the vociferous roar of the crowd, and I just find it really instructive. I think it works a treat.
Yeah, it'll be interesting as well to see how the Premier League clubs decorate their grounds when football returns, because Bayer Leverkusen did a really good job. So I think we've seen certain clubs in Germany and in the NRL where it's been sort of hijacked slightly, where you can pay 20 quid. Borussia Mönchengladbach, you pay 20 quid and you get your life-size cardboard cutout, but went slightly wrong in the NRL where they had Dominic Cummings and Harold Shipman and all sorts of people. It's unsurprising that this could happen. So there's that side of it. But whereas Bayer Leverkusen basically just have a giant covering that sort of looks like a crowd, and then the giant advertising. And actually, the stadium looked quite good. The stadium, again, didn't have that empty feel that was there for the first few weeks. So little bits and pieces making it look that little bit more normal and a more regular television experience. And again, it is the Bundesliga. We're not watching it generally every week. Like, you know what the Allianz Arena looks like, a full Allianz Arena, or what Borussia Dortmund Stadium looks like when it's full. Premier League's different. You know every stadium inside out. So I would be interested to see how that changes the viewing experience. Like the Emirates, which can be quiet enough at the best of times. Like an empty Emirates Stadium.
Feel exactly the same.
Well, I didn't want to say.
It's an interesting situation if they do end up going along the lines of the Bundesliga and the NRL. If a Premier League club has enough of a maverick PR guru to go with cardboard cutouts, British people will 100% go, hold my beer, and they will outdo Cummings and Shipman and go for something far more outrageous. I would trust the British public to be able to shock us with what they managed to put into the stands, but I'm sure no PR person over there would be silly enough to allow that to happen.
But if the starting point is Harold Shipman, where do you go for outrageous and shocking?
Well, that's true.
It's probably not a conversation we should have on air.
Absolutely not, especially not at 7:37 on Monday morning.
I am wondering what Liverpool will do, for example, with the Kop. Like, do you just leave it and let it sit there and let the players go and celebrate in front of imaginary supporters, or actually is there something quite nice you can do?
Yeah, it's a good point. I'm sure somebody's going to come up with something good, and especially Liverpool when it comes to their title procession over the next couple of weeks. Just to tell you the running order of what's coming up this morning, we're going to be chatting about Timo Werner, the big transfer news, possibly surprising in the fact that we have big transfer news already. Last Friday, it looks like a £53 million deal is going to be agreed between Chelsea and Leipzig for the striker. We're going to be chatting about that, and Klopp's comments, especially in the newspapers this morning, about how Liverpool just simply could not afford in the current climate to go toe-to-toe with Chelsea. Sheahan will be with us then after that to chat through the morning's sports news. The sports pages, as ever, coming your way at 8:15 on OTB AM. Then golf, it's back on Thursday. Golf Weekly's Nathan Murphy is with us for the morning, so we couldn't not talk about golf. Premier League returns. We're doing best case, worst case for every single Premier League club over the next 9 mornings. We're starting with the first 3, which is Arsenal, Aston Villa and Bournemouth this morning. And then Tyrone's Mt Rushmore, Enda McGinley and Orla Bannon will be with us after 9 o'clock. They're also going to hang around to chat about the GAA roadmap after that, as hope returns to the GAA, if that is your point of view. Some people may think that there's a little bit too much caution still being shown by the GAA, so we'll get into that at 20 to 10 this morning. First, though, let us have a look at Sunday's paper review. Mary O'Connor and Dave McIntyre joined Joe Malloy.
Black Lives Matter movement right across the States has been, well, quite extraordinary over the last 12, 13 days. Continued protests, unrest, Donald Trump managing to make the situation about 1 trillion times worse, almost, it would seem, each passing day. And then it has spread very much globally, and sport has been a part of the story. We've seen Roger Goodell and the NFL apologise, sort of. We have seen Jadon Sancho, amongst others, in the Bundesliga leading protests. We saw numerous players take knees yesterday. Here on the back page of the Mail on Sunday, Rob Draper, Premier League stars urged to kneel before games in support of anti-racism protests. This is, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Troy Townsend. He's the father of Andros. He's part of the Kick It Out group, and he was saying, absolutely, let them have a moment, let the captain speak before the game about it. We've seen the likes of Liverpool, Chelsea, Newcastle, Leicester already releasing pictures of their squads kneeling in solidarity. I mean, these are always strange conversations, because in many ways, these are just sports people like anybody else, and yet their views are amplified so much via social media and the platform that they have. So they do have incredible influence in this regard.
Yeah, they do. And it is good to see particularly younger guys like Jadon Sancho having the courage of his convictions, and not only to get his message across once, but then backing it up, doubling down on it when he played for Dortmund yesterday, and making the effort to show people that this is something that is going to have to be kept going, and it's just not a once-off. But I would have an issue with the fact that it's, again, just individuals that are going down this road. I would doubt Jadon Sancho has been encouraged to behave in this way by anybody. He has taken this on himself, and he's showing how things can be done if someone has the courage to actually go about it on an individual basis. And as you said, there were players up and down the leagues yesterday taking the knee. But at what stage will it go beyond just individual players? When will it become a collective thing? And when will these collective movements be backed by the administrators and the governing bodies? That is the key to it here. And you mentioned the NFL and Roger Goodell, and the NFL have obviously not covered themselves in glory at all by the manner in which they've approached this subject over the last few years, particularly since 2016 when Colin Kaepernick began making his protest on the sidelines. But it shouldn't just be down to these players. Yes, they are in a position where social media allows them to use their influence. They are role models. It's great that they're showing the way to maybe to younger people who mightn't be as educated as they could be in these matters. But the fact that we have seen so little from FIFA, from UEFA, from the FA, from the Premier League, and the administrative bodies across a whole host of sports forever really on this subject, not just in recent years. That's where this needs to change. And all week we've been hearing about people describing the murder of George Floyd as a turning point. And Ed Moses in the Sunday Times with David Walsh mentions it today. Well, I hope that's true, because this has been an issue long before what happened to George Floyd took place in the last week. It's been going on for hundreds of years. It's been in the media for most of the last 40 or 50 years. But we only seem to talk about it when something major like this takes place. And my fear is that this sense of perspective that we have right now will be lost in the weeks and months ahead, and that there's always a danger that we end up exactly where we started prior to the death of George Floyd.
Well, it's just what happens, isn't it? It always blows over. I mean, that is the very point with these things. I was watching a brilliant documentary. It's on the Now TV pass, if you're looking for it, and it was just charting the 1950s/60s when the civil rights movement really kicked off in a big way. You know, started in many ways with Rosa Parks in Alabama and not moving from her seat on the bus, and then the bus boycott started. That was led by a 26-year-old Martin Luther King. And then through the 60s, just the constant agitation for very, very simple things, i.e. Voting registration and the right to apply for certain jobs. And even then, in, I think it was 1963, 64, I hadn't realised this, but the protests were getting people nowhere. And the parents in, I think it was Montgomery, allowed their children, young teenagers, to go on the protest march because they suspected police brutality would happen again. But that wasn't making headlines at that stage. And the photo on the front page of the New York Times was of a very young, a teenager, 14, 15, black American child. And there was a policeman setting the dog on him and biting him in the stomach. And this was the picture the next day in the New York Times, which prompted John F. Kennedy to do more and gave him the political license to do more. And you would think that scenes like that are of a bygone era, and then you fast forward however many decades we are here, and George Floyd happens. You know, Tiger Woods this week came out and talked about the LA riots of '92, and here we are 30 years later. So, of course, it will blow over in many ways, Dave, and that is unfortunately the point. So it's always difficult. There's no end point with these conversations. I think it will blow over for a while, and then something else will happen and it will mushroom up again. I don't see how it can go any other way.
Well, isn't that the most, I'm not saying you're wrong, but isn't that the most disheartening, depressing view that you can possibly take of what's gone on over the last week? Because what is it all for? What are the protests for? What are the overreactions from the police forces about? The fact that there are some policemen being fired at on the streets, there's shops been looted, entire streets and cities are being set alight. Is it all in vain? And will we have forgotten about George Floyd in 6 months' time? And will it go down, as you say, the exact same route as what happened in LA in the early 1990s and any number of other incidents you can think of? Because there's always a reaction. Some are more extreme than others, depending on the nature of the incident. But soon enough, the story moves on. And so many African Americans will attest to that things will stay the same until the next incident. So what can possibly be done to make sure that this actually is a turning point? It's
Well,
I think it's down to the ordinary citizen to affect a change.
Yes, no,
because
and
certainly
it always has
in
been.
America they're not going to get it from their leadership.
Yeah,
and
it
that's
always has
obvious.
been. There are very simple things they could do with, for a start, the training of police officers, which it turns out is just completely different from state to state. The number of weeks that they have to put in training, there are massive discrepancies there. The unions are obviously incredibly powerful, but the effective immunity that police officers have over there, and some of their regulations around what they're allowed to do in terms of chokeholds and various other measures, they could all be changed overnight, but it just doesn't seem to happen. It's really hard to understand. Mary, there is, as Dave said, from a sporting perspective, there is the reaction of various individual players. And then, as Dave also referenced, there are, the NFL, in Oliver Holt's piece on page 77, he talks about these corporate behemoths, which is what they are, and he says the apologetic contortions of Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, hit the right note, but let us not be under any illusion. This is a battle for the brand. Goodell kept quiet when Colin Kaepernick, the former San Francisco 49ers quarterback, was drummed out of the league, his career ruined by a cabal of NFL owners for peacefully protesting against police brutality. And you do wonder, he talks about Goodell went full-on contrite on Friday. It does ring hollow, really. I mean, we're talking, this was very obvious to everybody 2, 3, 4 years ago when Colin Kaepernick started making these points. And now, Roger Goodell suddenly had a road to Damascus moment. I mean, I don't think that suddenly happened. I think this is about the brand.
I mean, I don't think anybody sees that comment from Goodell as anything but superficial and populist. I think Oliver Holt's article today is excellent. He speaks about what normal is, and following on from Dave's point about, that unified approach, it shouldn't take individual players, but maybe it takes individual players to start that and to get their organisations behind them. But, it's an excellent article, but there's 2 paragraphs in it where he speaks about what normal is, and it's about UEFA fining Bulgaria less for their fans' financial abuse of England players last year than they fined former Denmark forward Nicholas Bintner for his underpants sponsorship at Euro 2012. I mean, that's where we're at, and that's, a sad indictment of the sport, but also of society in general. It is endemic in society. But Oliver Holt is speaking about actions beyond gestures, and, some of the points he makes are quite relevant. They're important. If the tragedy that happened in America doesn't spark a real change in what we are in control of. And I think it goes back to what change is. People are threatened by change, but I think there's a huge responsibility on individuals and organisations now to take this on and not to let it blow over, to ensure that this is, in our mindset when we're thinking, diversity is important. And I think we need to be active around this point for a long time to come.
Yeah, it's true. And that part of Ollie Holt's piece is really strong, where he lists out various examples of normal. Normal, as you gave another example. He also says normal is UEFA fining Manchester City more for being a minute late for the second half against Sporting Lisbon than they fined Porto for racially abusing City players in another game. And he goes on to list tons of these examples and says we need, sport needs to fix this as well. You fix it by promoting more black executives to football boardrooms. You fix it by tackling that supporting sore of the chronic underrepresentation of black managers in the English game. You fix it by empowering black players to walk off the pitch when they're racially abused. And we had John Barnes on the show a couple of weeks ago before the death of George Floyd, and he was even talking about that English game in October and wondering why the English players didn't walk off the pitch. They went through the first 2 of 3 protocols and didn't go through the third one. And he asked, why didn't they walk off? It made no sense to him. The abuse continued in the second half. So these are the issues which football has to grapple with. In The Sun, by the way, Darren Bent talks about the atmosphere in English Premier League dressing rooms. He says it's really, very up until very recently in his career, maybe till he was 28, 29 years of age, but up until that point, he felt that there was humour in the dressing room that was just racist, and there was no other phrase he could put on it. And English dressing rooms need to think about things. But Dave, if we look closer to home, because we can be complacent here, Eamon Sweeney on the back page of the Sunday Independent, Black lives should matter here too. Give us a sense of what he's talking about in this article.
Well, it's a question of being able to point the finger at ourselves, Joe, and that's what Eamon's trying to get to the kernel of here, because and there's another piece in the main section of the Sunday Independent where the question is, does Ireland have a problem with racism? And of course, the answer is almost certainly yes. And this is where the ordinary citizen comes in, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that we are, and the three of us, for example, on this call here, we are privileged white people. And no matter how much we try to empathize with people of color in this country, we'll never be able to truly get a feel for what it is like to be a person of color in Ireland. And some of the issues that black people in this country, for example, have to deal with just walking down the street or going into the pub or taking part in a game of Gaelic football, they are issues that we will never have to deal with. So protesting is one thing, hand-wringing is an utterly useless reaction. We have to actually understand what the issue is. And I think Eamon Sweeney is trying to get to the nub of that. It's very difficult for someone who has no real experience of what it's like for these people to be able to do anything other than stand up for them. And I think if you're on a bus or you're in a pub and you hear somebody being verbally abused, racially abused, it is on us to actually be able to be brave enough to stand up and call it out, even if it's just with your friends over a WhatsApp group. And there's use of racist terms, or there is what Darren Bent describes as humour going on. We have to be able to say, do you know what, lads, I actually don't think we can use that word anymore. I don't think it's fair on us. I don't think it's fair on our children. And it's definitely not fair on the people that it is patently offensive to. That's going to be something that has to change. And that's something that we can do ourselves, starting today.
Yeah, he mentions a piece that Arthur O'Dea did last week. It's on the Off the Ball website. It's really well worth reading. It's an interview with Gina Akpe Moses, who talks of her hurt when, after she won medals for Ireland, online racists, right, Eamon Sweeney would declare, why do we have her? She's not Irish. Her name doesn't sound Irish, etc. He says there's a long and sorry history of racism in Irish sport, and goes on to list numerous examples. Mary, I know you picked out this piece as well. What jumped out to you?
Yeah, obviously an excellent piece by Eamon, but, obviously, again, topical, but it just shows he gave a cross-section of examples across Irish sport of incidences of racism and so on. But he's a really good paragraph where he says that there's a complacent assumption that Ireland is free from the kind of racism which sparked the Lives Matters protests in the USA. But Irish sport racism problem merely mirrors that of a society as a whole. And he's right, and he goes on to say that being different in any way can be dangerous in this country. We have the EU's second highest rate of hate crimes against trans people. So it's he put it together really well. But for me, the most powerful statement in it is the comment by Nadia Power, the former athlete, where she says that people need to be more than just not racist, but to be actively anti-racist. If you're making an honest effort to educate yourself and kind of say to yourself, have I done anything in the past, or should I be doing anything to stand up in the future? I think that's exactly it. It goes back again to that individual responsibility, and when we all take individual responsibility to educate ourselves, and there's been a lot in the media in the last few days about not asking people of colour to tell us about it, to actually go and find that out ourselves, and I think that's really important as well. But again, it's a really excellent article, and another good article in the Times by David Walsh as well, where he interviews the former athlete Edwin Moses about his experiences of racism, and how only that David brought up the racism with him in recent times, although he knew him for the last 20 years. So that tells its own story, that he didn't feel the need to bring it up in the past. But George Floyd's tragic death, kind of made him think about that again,
Yeah.
It's interesting, Joe, that Eamon Sweeney's very clever in that so much of the stuff that we hear the week is anecdotal, but Eamon Sweeney has introduced actual hardcore statistics into it, where, for example, there's a number that he includes in his piece where an appalling 21% of people from a sub-Saharan African background had experienced 6 or more physical attacks due to their ethnicity in the 5 years preceding the survey. Those numbers are absolutely horrifying, and they should rock everyone to their very core.
That jumped out at me as well. That was exactly what jumped out at me. I think if you asked Irish people, they would have no sense of that number. So this is 3 years ago. This is a survey by the European Union Fundamental Rights Agency. Ireland had the highest rate, we are number one, the highest rate of hate crimes against African people in the EU. And as you said, 21%. So a fifth of all sub-Saharan African people had experienced 6 or more physical attacks due to their ethnicity in the 5 preceding years. That shocked me. I can't believe that's true. So we're not reporting it well enough either, Dave, I would think, is the point.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could probably say that about almost all crimes in this country, where the vast majority of people might just see something minor and not bother reporting it. Maybe there's a fear that they may be targeted themselves. Maybe there's a fear that the resources aren't there for anything to be done about it. That's probably a different strand to the debate. But it goes back to individual responsibility. Would you step in if you saw or heard somebody being abused racially? Are we going to be able to change the culture? 30 years ago in this country, you weren't really frowned upon if you took a few pints and then got into the car and drove yourself home. Now it is absolutely abhorred nowadays. And that's the position we need to get to, where the culture has changed to an extent that you are an outcast if you are seen or heard to be racially abusing somebody or discriminating against somebody for the colour of their skin. And I would encourage anybody, next time you are on a bus and you hear somebody been spoken to in a way that is clearly unacceptable, if you remain silent, it is almost a silent nod of an agreement to the fact that what's happening is acceptable. And the person, the victim in that particular incident, they must feel so alone and so isolated when there are other individuals in and around them and nothing is done about it.
Just on that, Dave, as well, the national sports policy, when it was launched in 2018, it spoke about underrepresentation in Irish sport, and people who are from an ethnic minority are underrepresented in Irish sport. And there's a real action point now here for Irish sport to ensure that people of ethnic minority can participate in all sport. And I know that from the national governing body of sport and from local sport partnerships, they are trying to ensure that people feel welcomed into sport on a broader base across the country.
Yeah, it's the reality though, isn't it, Mary, that we put together various official measures and regulations and campaigns and initiatives like that, and that is the on-paper written record of what's happening. And then there is the reality of how somebody feels, and it can be just a look, a glance, the nature of how they're welcomed or not welcomed. That's the lived experience.
Yeah. And it only takes one incident to undo all the good work that's going on. I think we need to tell the story better. I think we need to tell the story of our athletes succeeding, not just at high performance level, but in communities as well, and the good work that is being done at grassroots level. And there needs to be more of that storytelling. And obviously, if there's incidents of racism in communities, that story needs to be told as well. But we need to ensure that Irish sport is a welcoming for people of all abilities, of all races and so on. And I think it's an important conversation that sport is having at the moment. But I do firmly believe that, that the opportunity is there now for us all to take responsibility as individuals, as Dave has said, but as organisations that we're involved in as well.
Yeah, I guess going to your earlier point, Dave, that is the opportunity something like George Floyd's death provides, is maybe it accelerates the conversation. It means that we're all talking about it. Like Eamon Sweeney here mentions, in 2008, there was an under-14 football game in Carlow where supporters taunted a 13-year-old. It started when we were doing the warm-up and went on for the whole match, the kid said at the time. And he lists out various other incidents. So here we are, 12 years after that incident. You would hope something like George Floyd's death and the subsequent conversation, even the points you've made about the bus, or if you see it at a match like this, maybe that's the opportunity. I was going to say the value, but you don't want to be glib about a man's death, but maybe that's the opportunity here.
Yeah, look, it's definitely an opportunity. But as we said, we've been given these opportunities many times in the past, and clearly they haven't been taken. You would hope that 12 years on from that incident, and the blood it runs cold when you read Tomoga Sabala's account of what happened in that under-14 football game. If this went on for the entire game, there were obviously parents there were adults, there were mentors and coaches. Not one of them stepped in to stop this happening. And I'm not sure how any parent can look themselves in the mirror that evening knowing that they witnessed something like this and did absolutely nothing about it. But so it's the necessity to avoid merely paying lip service to what's going on this week. And there's a lovely anecdote in David Walsh's piece in the Sunday Times, because one of his children asked him, what are you going to write about this weekend? Are you going to touch on the Black Lives Matter movement in your piece on Sunday Times? And he said, I have a relationship with Ed Moses. I'm going to give him a ring and get his thoughts on it. And his son just calls him out on it and says, so you, the privileged white writer, call up the former black athlete, effectively getting him to write your column for you. You then get paid for reproducing the insight he gives, and that's your contribution to the debate. Scornfully knocking his father off the pedestal. And as Walsh says, we only turn to our black acquaintances when we need them, not when they need us. And African Americans have been consistently telling the world about police brutality, not just this week because George Floyd died, but every week for the last God knows how many years. Maybe many of us are only listening this week.
Yeah.
Will we be listening next week? And the other question is, would we be having any of this discussion? The answer is almost certainly no, if the murder of George Floyd had not been caught on camera. He would have just been another number.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
This is OTB Sports Radio, Thursday Night Football with John Giles.
Who was that talking?
Troy Deeney.
Well, I think he should keep his mouth shut and have more respect for the opposition when he plays against them. And look at himself. If he was such a great player and was able to do all the things that he's talking to other people not doing, he wouldn't be on the bench. He'd be out there playing.
The best analysis of all the week's football from Ireland's #1 football man.
Obviously, after the Enda disaster, it was thrust on Bobby. And there was an awful lot of pressure on Bobby. He was carrying the team, and he handled himself brilliantly, and he played unbelievable stuff.
John Giles, every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on OTB Sports Radio, live 24/7 on the Go Loud app.
Missing this?
When that didn't materialise, I think both Paulie and myself probably looked at each other and kind of thought, what next?
Then get this, the all-new OTB Sports app. Off the Ball, Ireland's premier sports channel, now has a new home, featuring the biggest names in Irish and world sports. Podcasts, interviews, news, commentary, analysis, plus almost 20 years of sporting archives. All free and ready when you are, at home or on the go. The new OTB Sports app. Download it now from the App Store and Google Play.
OTB AM.
2 minutes past 8 on this Monday morning. That full Sunday Papers podcast is available now in your podcast stream and on youtube.com/off the ball. Right, so if you haven't noticed, today is the first day where things seem a little bit normal when it comes to Irish sport, especially it's our first Irish sporting event since lockdown began. We've got a race card at Naas today. But if you wanted sense of real normality returning to the world, then you will have known over the weekend that Chelsea have splashed 50 million quid on Timo Werner, or they have agreed a deal in principle at least, to sign the RB Leipzig striker, bring him to the club. And all of a sudden, Nathan Murphy, it feels like Premier League clubs are behaving like Premier League clubs once again. But interestingly, this morning, Jurgen Klopp is quoted as saying, how can you justify this when you've got salary deferrals, when you've got players at your clubs taking pay cuts, and you look across to a club in London and see them splashing out 50 million quid. Something's not quite right. And I'm very much tongue-in-cheek when I say that things feel normal here. I personally was very surprised to see this happen when it did.
Maybe the timing of the announcement, well, even though it hasn't come out officially, but I understand what Jurgen Klopp is saying, and clubs are going to suffer a huge loss because of match day revenue potentially not being there for another year. There's talk of a rebate to some of the television companies. So clearly clubs aren't quite as rich as they were 3-4 months ago. But you do have to speculate to accumulate. And for Chelsea to make money, being in the Champions League and being successful in the Champions League is the key to that. So whereas there are players who, and Chelsea I think generally have dealt with this situation very well by all accounts, they've been giving their hotel beside the ground to the NHS for free. They've been very involved in the community in West London. Do we expect football clubs not to buy players this summer? Of course they are. Of course they are. And the irony, I guess, is that in some ways Roman Abramovich hasn't been spending as much money as usual over the last few years, but they've obviously realised it was an opportunity. Everybody expected Timo Werner to go to Liverpool. It had been talked about for 6 months. There wasn't really any indication that anybody else was overly in the mix, but they spotted a gap. Liverpool hesitated. The questions as to where he would have fit in that Liverpool team anyways would come up. But Chelsea spotted an opportunity. They have the money. Is it going to affect morale if pay cuts, pay deferrals and all that sort of stuff comes in? Do Chelsea, can they as a business really care about clubs in League One, League Two? You'd have to say no. They can help out in other ways there if needs be. I don't know if they will or they won't. But I think it's pretty naive to think that Premier League clubs are just going to stop spending. Like Arsenal would be the interesting one. I know we're going to touch on them later, considering their players were in quite quickly with pay cuts / deferrals. And you'd have to say, considering the terms and conditions applied to a lot of it, you would say pay cuts. Do Arsenal not sign anybody now this summer because of this?
Well, that's the thing. It looks like Arsenal and Tottenham are both going to look for loan deals and free transfers this summer, which, if you look across at what Chelsea are doing, will spell a bit of trouble for them, to be quite honest. Like, just to go through some more of what Klopp has been saying, he says it's rather quiet here at Liverpool at the moment. I think it's safe to say, if you want to take it seriously and run a normal business and depend on income and have no idea how much you will earn, especially because we don't know when we can start playing with spectators again. At the moment, all clubs are losing money. Without spectators, we have to pay back the season tickets and probably sell none next year. Do you get a sense here that Klopp is frustrated about the whole Werner deal? Like, there was word that Werner would have loved to have worked with Klopp. Did Klopp share that same idea of getting Werner in and kind of moulding him into a great attacking player for this club?
Well, if they were having chats on Zoom over the last couple of months, you'd have to imagine there was some inclination there from Jurgen Klopp that he was interested. Jurgen Klopp can't really make that public right now. He can't make public, considering what's gone on in the northwest of England, that he's disappointed that his team won't spend 50 million on an extra player. And remember, that's what right now Timo Werner will be. All right, there's definite long-term planning which you want to do. Chelsea's need is probably greater. Christian Pulisic has come in. He's done well when he has played, but has been quite injury prone so far, and they're trying to build and rebuild pretty much an entire side after Eden Hazard's departure. They definitely need strengthening in those attacking areas, and they have their own transfer ban, so they're clearly realising now is the time to go and spend. So he touched on Kai Havertz as well. These are players that you would imagine Liverpool are most definitely going to be interested in, but as he said, from a purely business point of view, and if you are looking at this with Liverpool not having owners who are going to put their hands in their pockets whenever and wherever possible, how can you? Like, we have no idea when supporters are going to be back at Anfield again. We've no idea what their matchday revenue is going to be next year, the amount of jerseys they're going to sell, what sort of a dip is that going to take over the next little while. So they may just have to suck it up. They're in a strong position because of the quality of players they already have. They're not desperate to get them in the way that some clubs I think are for reinforcement. What will Manchester United do this summer, who are desperately in need of reinforcements? And again, like, their entire plans may well have been around Paul Pogba leaving for 100 million and where they spend that. Is anybody going to buy Paul Pogba now for that sort of price? Possibly not. So it's very much in a state of flux, I feel, the transfer market. There will be a lot of loan deals. There will be probably a lot of loan deals with a view to purchasing a year later when hopefully everything is back to some sense of normality. But there will be the odd club you would expect who can go and complete this big money deal. And maybe if they get him for 50-55 million, you look at his record in the Bundesliga this season, 25 goals in 30 matches, contributing again at the weekend with an assist. Like, maybe it's good value for money. Take advantage while you can, could well be the Chelsea model.
In 2019 figures, it certainly would have been good value for money. That's the question. Is 50 million quid going to be what it was last year? If there's a lower value on it, then it might change things a little bit. But it's interesting on the Paul Pogba situation. Like, I wonder if an agent like Mino Raiola now looks around at someone like Werner earning 200k a week, which is the reported wage he's going to earn at Chelsea, and say, well, Jesus, this money is still sloshing around quite healthily at the moment, so I'm going to get as good a deal as possible for my client. I do realise that the news over the weekend has been that Pogba will likely stay put at Old Trafford because of COVID-19 and that the football economy will slow down. But I just wonder that, like, once you have one moving part, then who is going to replace Werner? Where is the Red Bull money going to go? And who will replace that person that they sign? And what will be the knock-on impact here? We suddenly have the wheels in motion of the mega moves that we've got to know so well over the last 20 years of football.
Yeah, and maybe, again, we were all a bit naive that when this crisis started that the world would be a radically different place financially and in a business sense when it ended, that we'd be in some sort of more socialist model. I think that's probably unlikely. It's just that the figures will be down, whereas it felt in March when we were looking at potential deals for the summer that the transfer record at every club was going to end up being broken because it was just more and more and more money piling into the Premier League. Maybe it just plateaus for the next couple of years, but I would still expect that most clubs will be in a position to spend 40-50 million on a player if they desperately needed them. Certainly even Liverpool, if it was a case of one of their front three was out injured for 6 months. I would expect that they could go and still do that. Manchester City obviously have their own issues in the transfer market, which are going to potentially come to a bit of a head today with the hearing into the financial fair play issue and the European ban. Chelsea have shown they can do it. Tottenham and Arsenal are in a slightly different situation. Arsenal, as we know, notoriously spendthrift, and Tottenham last week had to take out a loan of 175 million. Like, this crisis couldn't have come at a worse time for them, considering how much they've spent on their new stadium, and also again how much they would have projected. All of their projections, and how could they have projected anything else, would have come from having 61,000 in that stadium, packed house, expensive tickets, everybody buying their jerseys, everybody buying the merchandise, and that's now gone. So that puts them in a difficult position. But I think we will see, maybe not quite to the same level, and it won't go up, the overall transfer spend. But I still think we'll see a lot of deals come the end of July when the season finishes.
Yeah, I think you probably will be right in that one. There's more to come on Arsenal, by the way, a little bit later on. Themselves, Aston Villa and Bournemouth will be part of our first ever worst case, best case scenario as we look to the Premier League's resumption in just 9 days. It is 11 minutes past 8 on this Monday morning. Shane Hannon, a very good morning to you.
Very good morning, lads. How are you keeping?
Not too bad at all. What's happening in the world this morning?
Yeah, we'll kick off with the GAA Games news that's dominating some of the newspapers this morning. John Horan saying Croke Park could hold up to 21,000 spectators for Championship games later this year under current COVID-19 restrictions. The GAA president also believes that number could be doubled to 42,000 if social distancing is reduced from 2 metres to 1 metre. The GAA's roadmap to return will see intercounty action resume in October as things stand. And Horan admits Croke Park may have to become an all-seater stadium, which would see bucket seats installed on Hill 16. Horse racing gets back underway in Ireland today after 77 days since the last card due to the COVID-19 lockdown. The first meeting behind closed doors and under strict protocols takes place at Naas Racecourse. The first of 8 races there goes to post today at 5 to 3 this afternoon. Love was the winner at Newmarket yesterday, meanwhile, as the behind the closed doors classic meeting came to an end. The Aidan O'Brien trained horse ridden by jockey Ryan Murr came in ahead of Cloak of Spirits. That was in the 1,000 guineas. Some soccer as well. Manchester City take their appeal against the 2-year ban from European football to the Court of Arbitration for Sport today. The Premier League champions, for now at least, were handed the punishment by UEFA in February for allegedly breaking financial fair play rules. City have always strongly denied any wrongdoing. The result of that appeal isn't expected until next month at the earliest. Meanwhile, FIFA President Gianni Infantino has indicated salary and transfer fee caps could be brought in to help football recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. A number of clubs at all levels have expressed fears about the financial impact of the coronavirus on the sport. The Mayor of Liverpool, Joe Anderson, would be in favour of the Merseyside derby taking place at Goodison Park. Liverpool could have a chance of wrapping up the Premier League title away to city rivals Everton when the season resumes later this month. Anderson had previously voiced his opposition to the match being played at Goodison, and Merseyside police have already stated they wouldn't object to the Toffees hosting the game, despite fears the Reds supporters could congregate around the ground for that game. Meanwhile, you've already been talking about Timo Werner, Liverpool's long-term transfer target, of course. Last week, looking like he's moving closer to a move to Chelsea. Meanwhile, Liverpool club legend Robbie Fowler is urging Liverpool fans not to have a meltdown over the German striker. You can read Fowler's full thoughts this morning on Timo Werner on otbsports.com, or indeed the best place, the new OTB Sports app. You can download that for free right now in the App Store or the Play Store. New Zealand Rugby has confirmed fans will be allowed to attend domestic Super Rugby competition, which kicks off next weekend. The government in New Zealand has confirmed they will be lifting all restrictions on mass gatherings, including at stadiums. The Highlanders play the Chiefs in Dunedin on Saturday in the opening game, while the Blues host the Hurricanes in Auckland the following day. And finally, the big story from this morning, lads. Fast food chain Burger King was a huge topic of conversation during Alajuelense's clash against Saprissa in the Costa Rican League. I'm sure you'll have heard of this. You follow the Costa Rican League closely, I'm sure. One of the players, Jonathan McDonald, the key there is his surname, instead used another popular fast food company, Burger King, above his squad number 19 as part of a marketing stunt. So it added to the heated rivalry between McDonald's and Burger King. Burger King have been known to cause a stir, of course, in the footballing world. 3 years ago, back in 2017, it was reported Russian side Zenit St. Petersburg had received a £1 million offer from the fast food giants to change their name to Zenit Burger King. So that's the big story this morning.
One to keep an eye on as the day progresses. Make sure to follow Shane Hannon and get on to otbsports.com for the later on that one. Huge controversy in Costa Rica this morning. Let's tell you what's coming up on OTB AM over the next little while. We're going to be getting stuck into the sports pages in just a moment at 8:15 on this Monday morning. We've got a bit of golf chat coming up with Nathan Murphy as well. After that, Tyrone's Mt Rushmore is coming up after 9 o'clock this morning, and then we'll be getting into the GAA return to play protocols. Sports pages are next.
OTB AM.
We'll start with the website, otbsports.com. Let's have a look at what is on the homepage. It is our own OTBAM article, and then you've got the hotel was above a lap dancing club, Darren O'Dea on Euro 2012, and all the shenanigans going on around that, and learning from Trap. That is Kieran Bradley's piece. He was on off the ball over the course of the weekend, Darren O'Dea. Elsewhere on the homepage, British and Irish Lions Tour moved to South Africa is one of the stories under the rugby headlines, but you've also got Jose Mourinho is the best in the world when things are going well, ranking and evaluating the NFL's best offences, and Jurgen Klopp has sights set on Premier League points records. Just one comment in before we move on to your first paper, dear Nathan, from Welton Man on YouTube. Chelsea able to spend money because of a transfer ban. So mismanagement allowed them to spend money when other clubs could not. Not bad for a club who made a £96 million loss last year.
Yeah, I don't think they felt they were particularly fortunate when they had that transfer ban, and maybe they are going to be the sole beneficiary of this pandemic in the Premier League, that things worked out. They had and I know you're talking about a £96 million loss, but maybe all the money they had planned and spending in the summer of 2019 they had held back, and that things could work out quite nicely considering the amount of brilliant young players that they also managed to develop so far this season, bringing through the likes of Mason Mount. We saw Billy Gilmore emerging towards the latter stages of the league campaign as well. Maybe it does work out. Well, football is unfair, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the other thing there that I just wanted to get your take on actually was just about the whole idea of this Liverpool title party, and it's kind of mentioned there with Klopp talking about chasing the points record. Shane mentioned it, Joe Anderson being in favour of the Merseyside derby taking place at Goodison Park, and him previously having voiced his opposition to the match being played at Goodison, and that the police have already stated they wouldn't object to Everton hosting the match despite fears that the Red supporters could congregate around the ground. Like, is this unbelievably unfair on Liverpool fans to just be throwing this out there that all of Liverpool is suddenly going to congregate, knowing the risk that might bring to the community there? Like, are we being completely unfair on football fans as a whole and not trusting them enough to say, like, if there's a Premier League one in an empty stadium, that you will automatically just show up? Like, do we not give them a bit more credit than that?
Yeah, I think it's clear from the start it's been incredibly unfair on football fans, but is that not the way the British establishment has always been? So we see pictures day in, day out from the UK of huge gatherings, whether it's 25 degrees and there's thousands of people at the beach. How many people are going to turn up? Worst case scenario, Liverpool win the league at Goodison Park. How many people are going to congregate outside Anfield or outside Goodison Park? Maybe you might get a couple of thousand outside, which again doesn't seem to be a huge issue as long as people aren't gathering together indoors. So it is just trying to focus on football fans that they can't be trusted. Like, that has never been lost within British society, that football fans, deep down, there's still this thought process that there's this massive hooligan element and they can't be trusted and they have to constantly be told what to do. And all of this, reading about it over the weekend, came from initially the Premier League were obviously so desperate for football to come back that when they first started having the conversations, they were open to anything. And the Premier League were, well, if we need to play games behind closed doors, we'll play games behind closed doors. And it seemed to gather a little bit of momentum. But everything you hear from all the different police departments in the UK is that they don't seem to have a major issue with this. It's not like there is going to be a Liverpool parade a week later down through the city centre, down by the Albert Dock. That's not going to happen. So you're not going to have 100,000 people around Anfield or around Goodison Park. Maybe you do get a small amount of people, maybe you get a couple of thousand. But again, how many gatherings have there been outside in the UK over the last couple of weeks where there have been a few thousand people in somewhat close proximity? It's not an ideal scenario, but you don't see this national outrage against them. So I don't understand why it's football supporters, and it seems to be Liverpool supporters in particular, that they feel just can't be trusted.
Yeah, it is interesting. It seems that they would like their cake and eat it quite a bit when it comes to the UK government, that they will push forward the football as this great PR shining light on how they're getting back to normal in society. But you can't have too much of that good thing because we can't trust football fans. That seems to be the tone coming from over there. That is otbsports.com at the moment. You can read more of Jurgen Klopp's comments on there right now. You're leading with the Irish Independent.
Yeah, giant photograph on the back of the Irish Independent, familiar one as well. Ray Houghton heading the ball past Peter Shilton. They're running a series all week in the Irish Independent on Ireland's adventures at European and World Cups, from Stuttgart to Lyon when the nation held its breath. The other story on the Irish Independent is lines hit out at negative misrepresentation as racing gets ready to return. This is Ger Lyons, the trainer, questioning the criticism that is there of racing's rush to return in many ways. A lot of this obviously stemming from Cheltenham going ahead, and whether you blame the British authorities or the racing authorities for it going ahead. But Ger Lyons, the Meath trainer, says, I don't get this consistent negativity thrown towards us. I make no apologies for going back to work. I'm not embarrassed to go back to work. If that offends you, F off. I don't give a damn, is one way of writing it. There's so many negatives being written here. Horsey people being looked after again. That's not the case. He says, our game has changed a lot since I was a kid. A lot of misrepresentation. They automatically think of tax exiles, etc., whereas a lot of us out here just getting up every day and walking the roads and doing our jobs. It's very much a business, a lot of misconceptions. I think he makes a lot of good points there. There's a lot of comparing apples and oranges here when it comes to the different sports and how the GAA are going and how horse racing and are some being prioritised. Like, some of these are in more dire need and are in far more of a rush to keep the business side of things going. So likewise, while the GAA are getting criticism, the FAI are pretty much running off a similar timeline in terms of getting pitches open and getting people back playing. And one of the things we saw on Friday is that elite professional sport can return. So you see that the 4 European teams in the League of Ireland, they're allowed to come back. All our Olympians are now allowed to go back training from today. But those with amateur status have been treated differently. I don't see a major, if everything's been done right in horse racing, if all other businesses are opening today, well, there's no reason why horse racing shouldn't be allowed to do it either. And again, there's no reason why they shouldn't be trusted.
For sure. And it is that lead story on the front of the Irish Examiner sports section as well. Joseph O'Brien saying a lot of the protocols would have been happening in the yards anyway. Naas, of course, playing host to today's marquee occasion, the first major sporting event in these shores since Ireland went into lockdown after the threat of COVID-19. Joseph O'Brien is quoted in this. He's saying it's a virus. We've seen it time and time again. When something goes through a yard, it could finish it for the year. So in that regard, everyone will be fairly aware anyway, though obviously not to the extent we have been in recent times. You've obviously got a situation here today where Jessica Harrington can't attend a race meeting because of her age. She says, my own opinion is that we should be able to make up our own minds. If you're over 70 and you have underlying health conditions, you shouldn't go. But if you are healthy, what is the difference between you and a 69-year-old? And then there's, of course, a breakdown here of all the summer sport. Slowly but surely, we're getting back to normal. And it's a handy little timeline of events there in the Irish Examiner. And the lead story here from John Fogarty and from a GAA perspective is that Croker may have to become all-seater in social distancing era. The capacity of Croke Park will be 21,000 after the 5,000 limit is lifted by the government, according to John Fogarty here. However, that would double to 42,000 was social distancing be reduced to 1 metre. Bucket seats would have to be installed on Hill 16 for large games in the stadium, which is an interesting one because you look at what the RFU are saying in the Irish Times this morning, and it kind of is different, to be honest, because they're thinking about how do they feel at Twickenham, for example, and Bill Sweeney has said if you use 2 metres in an 80,000-seater stadium and factor in traffic flow, such as someone wanting to use a toilet without going past someone and touching them, it reduces your capacity to between 9,000 and 9,500. So the RFU are looking at an 80,000-seater stadium and saying we can get less than 10,000 people in there. The GAA are looking at an 80,000 people stadium and saying we can get over 20,000 people in there. There is a disparity here, and I'm not sure has there been any official word from health authorities on where to fall down in this. I don't think it's necessarily a situation where you take a percentage of the capacity and that is that because you can social distance in your seat. There are walkways, a very narrow walkway around certain areas of Croke Park, getting in and out of your seat, going to the bathroom, especially if you've got double headers in the stadium and all that sort of thing. I just wonder, has this been seen through to the nth degree that we are certainly going to have 21,000 people in Croke Park at some point this year?
No, I don't think it has. I think it's still too fresh for that. And again, it does feel like there's a lot of crude maths going into that. So we divide it by a quarter. If it's 2 minutes, 2 meters, we divide it in half. again, as you say, how do people get in and out of the stadium? Is there, does it take 2 hours to get in and out of going to a match now? I'm not quite sure. And also, so say, for example, if you've got a family of 5, there's no reason why the 5 in the family can't sit together. There's no reason why everybody in a household can't sit together. So how does that work from a ticketing point of view? Again, can you get more people in that way? Do you sell a certain amount of family tickets and they all sit one per row and you divide it up? It sounds incredibly complicated to do that, but perhaps it's worthwhile if it gets more people into the stadium, gets more revenue for the GAA.
You've just stumbled upon the golden ticket there for the GAA, I think. Prioritise households and family passes, have little pods for them, and therefore you can get a fuller stadium like that. Of course, family passes would be cheaper. I've often wondered, who will be prioritised here when it comes to the 21,000? Is it season ticket holders? Those people who were looking at the small print and feeling they were screwed over by the GAA earlier in the year, are they now thinking to themselves and rubbing their hands, we're the lucky ones now because we've got a season ticket and we're going to be the first in? Premium ticket holders, John Horan mentioned that as well, they're going to have to be accredited the following year, he says. That it's a bit of a disaster for premium ticket holders this year because they all have their seats.
No corporate boxes.
Not for you this year anyway. I'm not sure who your guy or your woman is that sorts you out with your corporate box special seat for Mayo semi-final every year, but they might not be able to sort you out this year. What would it be like actually if it was a Mayo All-Ireland win just before Christmas? Would that be the sweetest way to do it, or would it be an empty Croke Park kind of crap?
You see, I've had this discussion with a few people about the GAA potentially coming back. And listen, you talk to the players, the vast majority of players are saying they want to get back. They would play behind closed doors. Listen, Dreamland, fantasy stuff, Mayo winning an All-Ireland in front of an empty stadium with no supporters there, with no homecoming allowed. I don't know.
So you're saying if somebody offered that to you now, you'd be like, no.
Well, we'd probably just
we've waited long enough.
Let's take it and worry about it. At least then the curse would be gone, and we'd have moved on, and we could enter a period of domination. I'll tell you one thing: I wouldn't fancy sitting at the back of Hill 16 on the 22nd of December for an All-Ireland final
in a bucket seat. No, that's a good point actually. That is a really good point. That would be a terrible. In fairness, it would be better than the opening league match, more than likely. It'd be similar. There's nowhere colder in the world than the top tier of either stand in Croke Park if the wind is blowing. No, it's bad. But the opening icebreaker every Christmas is it's Fierce Mild this Christmas, and that has been the ongoing theme for the last 10 years. So I welcome a mid-December Hill 16 experience as opposed to a National League one. But that is the Irish Examiner this morning. Plenty happening.
Yeah, let's move on to the Times, which has a picture of Rio Ferdinand. He was at a Black Lives Matters march in London yesterday, and FA chief wants plan for more black leaders. So the conversation very much moving on now around English sport, from not just racist abuse, but also how many black people are involved in the running of the game. And Paul Elliott, the former player, is very much involved in the FA, asking that question now, what the FA's plans are to increase the representation from that community. Elsewhere, owners to miss Mersey Derby because of the quarantine rules in the UK. The Liverpool owners would need to be in by now so they can quarantine for 2 weeks. They're going to let up to 300 people, it seems, in one way or another around Premier League matches. So some owners may be allowed into the games. And clubs push to lower wage cap. This is in rugby. So a majority of Premiership clubs are looking for the wage cap to be reduced from 7 million, and also to get rid of the marquee player rule. So I think everybody feels that rugby is entering a really uncertain period in terms of wages and in terms of we consistently hear, because the international game is just so important and how much revenue comes from the international game and the hosting of those autumn and internationals and Six Nations games. And if they happen behind closed doors, it's going to be a huge, huge blow. And it seems now at the club game as well, the players are going to take the hit, and clubs are realising that they're just simply not going to be able to afford to pay those players. So some tough times, you'd imagine, coming for a lot of the professional rugby players.
The Irish Times this morning leads with Rory Croke's piece that billion-euro industry continues to be self-regulated. This is a story that came up prior to and during the election, and I think everything that comes with the general election this year has obviously been put to one side for obvious reasons. He's been writing that it's 7 years since Fine Gael attempted to begin process of regulating gambling. Jim O'Callaghan of Fianna Fáil has been drafting gambling control bill which could, among other things, according to the piece, see the creation of a gambling regulator that could ban live in-play betting, ban betting with a credit card, and curb gambling advertising. The regulator would also be self-funded by a levy on gambling industry. It's interesting stuff. It's been a big part of the Fianna Fáil manifesto going into this year's general election. There is that piece that I've already mentioned. Gavin Comiskey, IRFU expected to lobby for a reduction of physical distancing to 1 metre. So the RFU are planning on getting involved in the politicking on this in the UK, and the IRFU are going to do the same, because if they can reduce the 2 metre rule to a 1 metre rule, then you can get a hell of a lot more people into the stadium. So as I've already mentioned, the RFU figure that with a 2 metre rule, your capacity in Twickenham is between 9 and 9,500 people. But if you can get it to 1 metre, which is the World Health Organization's guidance, you could get close to 40,000. So there's a disparity. It's not necessarily just doubling up if you half the distance. You can actually quadruple the amount of people in the stadium. This is according to Bill Sweeney, the RFU chief executive. So a good piece there by Gavin Comiskey. And then Brian O'Connor saying racing has a chance to lure new fans as it becomes first sport to return. As we said at the top of the show, it's basically got a 9-day window to win the hearts and minds of everybody, because it has the stage to itself.
Then we have the back page of the Mirror story we were talking about earlier on. Hold tight. Jurgen Klopp insists his Reds will eventually have their Champions Bus Parade, even if people think we're a bit crazy. So Jurgen Klopp saying even if it's next year, they're going to have their parade to celebrate winning the title. But Anfield boss warns club can't now afford to make 50, 60 million signings while asking players to take big pay cuts. Now, as far as I know, Liverpool players haven't taken a huge pay cut so far, but maybe they're looking down the track. And if supporters aren't allowed back into the stadium next season, maybe players will have to take a pay cut. So Liverpool, obviously, that around to Timo Werner's story. Similar story just above that. No virus discount for 100 million Koulibaly. This is for Manchester United. Interesting signing, Koulibaly from Napoli, but there is going to be no change to their stance in the transfer market. They still want the 100 million for Koulibaly. And Kenny, another young English player shining bright in the Bundesliga. That's John Joe Kenny, who's on loan at Schalke from Everton and scored for Schalke over the weekend.
The Irish Daily Star this morning leads with that open top bus story. Open Klopp bus tour is their headline. Jurgen says Poole will wait for their right to party. The power of love, all you need is love. Ryan Moore riding love to win the 1,000 guineas at Newmarket yesterday. A slew of potential puns on that one. August target for Aviva fans. Meanwhile, writes Derek Foley, the RFU could be allowed to play games at the Aviva Stadium in front of as many as 25,000 supporters in late August. Horan, Hill may have bucket seats. That's GAA President John Horan saying bucket seats may have to be installed in Hill 16. And also that Kalidou Koulibaly story. United told to cool the jets on Kalidou.
The back of the Mail, Jofra stand up to racism. This is the England cricket player, Jofra Archer, backing the Black Lives Matter campaign. The picture is of the players of Union Berlin and Schalke, who took the knee yesterday ahead of their game in tribute to the Black Lives Matter campaign. And also Klopp admits Werner U-turn down to money. So again, that story from Jurgen Klopp that Liverpool simply had to back out of signing Timo Werner because they could no longer afford it.
The Irish Sun here is a light in the dark. Klopp says with cash woes of virus, £54 million on Werner could be a leap in the dark. I should have read the little words before I read the big words. Horan seat 16 for Croker. John Horan last night revealed installing bucket seats in Hill 16 is an option when the GAA reopens Croke Park for matches. And City ban CAS for concern. Manchester City will go head-to-head with UEFA today to avoid a black hole of up to £200 million. So interesting times in that case. Will it be a top 5 or a top 4? We should know, hopefully, in the next couple of days.
On the back of The Guardian, call for Truth Commission, British sports so structurally racist, it's a kind of apartheid. It's an interesting story, an exclusive from Sean Ingle. Chris Grant, who is one of the most high-profile black administrators in British sport, saying that British sport may need a South African-style Truth and Reconciliation Commission to tackle what he sees is an inherent racism in administration. So that's covered on a couple of the British newspapers today. Another one from a purely footballing point of view, Nkaggia refuses extension on West Ham deal to finish season. And I was watching about Charlton at the weekend. So Charlton have 3 of their best players out of contract at the end of the season. They're right down in the relegation zone in the Championship, and the 3 of them all have moves lined up to bigger clubs because they're out of contract and don't want to play. And that may well become a bit of an issue as well for some of those teams in the Premier League. We haven't heard a huge amount about it. Like, there's a lot of players out of contract. You look at the likes of Jeff Hendrick at Burnley, you would expect the vast majority of them will go on and play out the season. But for some players, they just think the risk of injury is too much when there is absolutely no guarantee if they do get injured that they'll have a club next season.
It's a remarkably tricky situation for people in that at the moment. The Daily Telegraph is next up for me. City confident of beating 2-year European ban is their headline on their CAS hearing. Club bullish ahead of court appeal against UEFA today. Chief Executive says they have irrefutable evidence. ITV doubles Guinea's ratings. Meanwhile, a lot of people watching the racing at the weekend. Roses contribute 35 grand to sponsor women's golf series. Meanwhile, this is Justin Rose and his wife Kate, who are to sponsor a series of women's golf tournaments for British professionals starting on June 18th. Neutral venues could still be used when Top Flight returns, writes Jeremy Wilson. And the big story here from the Daily Telegraph this morning, which ties in nicely to what you were saying about the Bundesliga at the top of the show, Nathan. Fan songs will enhance empty grounds, writes Matt Law. Home goals to be marked by pre-recorded chants. Premier League plans to boost viewing experience. So there is a new broadcast enhancement advisory group which exists. I didn't know about their existence, but this broadcast enhancement advisory group is going to try and improve the viewing experience for fans with games behind closed doors. Some of the ideas that came out from last Thursday's meeting are as follows. Pre-recorded supporter songs to mark goals by the home team. Sounds pretty good. Fan walls beamed into the stadium and through television. So I don't think you'll have your Harold Shipman cardboard cutout. These will be, I presume, like Instagram walls, like you might have on the big screen in Croke Park. Stadium dressing to help disguise empty seats and minimise echo. That's also a very good point. The echo when you're hearing the audio coming straight from the pitch is a little bit jarring, so that will actually stop a little bit of the echo. Players recording their own pre-match features for television. I'm not sure what exactly that means, but
there was talk last week that it would be in and around the dressing rooms, that they would basically do shorted, again, Instagram-style selfie videos.
So Jesse Lingard having
behind. Exactly. That can only go down an absolute treat. I can see it already. Jesse Lingard bands, flashback to studio. There's Roy Keane and Graham Souness. Glorious.
Supporters given the option to hear FIFA 20 crowd noise at home. Fixed cameras in the tunnel area. And now, stadiums will be able to use pre-recorded supporter songs at kickoff. This is in the stadium, pumping stuff into the stadium, not just in...
So they'll play You'll Never Walk Alone as normal at Anfield.
Yes, but they can also do it to mark goals by the home team, substitutions for the home team, half-time, full-time, and VAR delays. So it won't get to the level of the NBA where you can actually play music mid-play, but when the ball is out of play and when there's delays for VAR and stuff like that, you can play whatever you want. So step up, Mr. DJ, and play the tunes. It's like it kind of reminds me of your man from Sunderland Till I Die who wanted to change the Tiesto song to something else, and he was playing it into an empty stadium to massive echoes. That is what every CEO is going to be for the next few weeks.
Part of me does wonder how much of all this, let's get as much noise as possible around the game, is to make sure that we do not hear the players talking to each other and the language that comes out of the players. Because I have commentated on behind closed doors games before. I might have touched on this. I commentated on a game involving Jetro Willems, who's now with Newcastle. He was sent off in a Europa League game last year. He was sent off right on the halfway line, just in front of the two dugouts. And it turns out Jetro has very good English for what he was calling the referee. I mean, every profanity under the sun was uttered by Jetro. It was, it's tough to explain.
I can imagine. You're next up with the Herald.
I don't have the Herald. I'm sure it's great, though.
The Herald is fantastic this morning. I'll root that out in just a second. But we'll bring you the Irish news, which leads with quotes from Jamar Hall. Racism has been an issue throughout my sporting career. This is the Armagh footballer Jamar Hall, who's been out to talk, and there is a couple of pictures from Newmarket as well yesterday. Love getting the business done yesterday. And I will root out this Herald, and it is a Croker will be half full. Only 21,000 allowed until social distancing is reduced. And Klopp aims for points record tally. Also Stuttgart to Lyon when the nation held its breath for our heroic boys in green. So that is the Herald. One more look at the brand new OTB Sports app this morning. It is our brand new home for everything we do across Off the Ball. Pretty happy with it, look at that. So to download it, just search for OTB Sports in your App Store or the Google Play Store. You can see the feed here with all the latest sports news. Then there is a live radio function right beside that at the bottom left as well, where you can listen to OTB AM as a breakfast radio show every morning. In the video tab then as well beside that, you've got the OTB Podcast Network, where we're bringing you over 40 new podcasts every week, so you can subscribe to your favourite series and listen live on the app. So plenty happening there this morning. As I say, download it on the App Store or on the Google Play Store if you've got an Android. So Chip Beck was a special guest on this week's Golf Weekly. You can subscribe to Golf Weekly, by the way, and get every single one of the episodes through the OTB Sports app right now. Here is Chip on the genius of Jack Nicklaus.
What was Nicklaus like?
Nicklaus was a true gentleman. And gosh, I'll never forget the shot he hit at Troon first time I played with him. He hit this long, beautiful, towering rocket 1-iron. We could watch it. It kicks dead right, goes dead right across the fairway. We get down there walking side to side, and the ball is buried in a divot. The ball's underground. He said, Chip, that's British golf, isn't it? That's the kind of guy he was. He never would pull against you. He never would do anything to hurt your play. He was a true gentleman, a true competitor, and one of the greatest humans I've ever been around at that level of competition, because he truly was the type guy that didn't have to knock you down. He would help you up and still beat you. I love that kind of guy.
And was he a talker on the golf course?
He was very conversational, kind, just normal, just like he is today. He would talk to you very normally about different circumstances, situations. I mean, the most interesting thing, I asked him, because we're playing this long par 3, and it's into a gale, and the wind's coming in there, and I stand up there, and I said, well, I'm going to rifle this 1-iron in there. I play it back, hood it down, roll it in there. Man, it's going good. Pop, pop, pop. It's in the bunker. Nicklaus hits 3-wood straight up in the air. It comes down short of the green. And I said, man, Jack, I thought you'd be doing something with that ball. He said, Chip, I never do anything that I can't do. And I thought, this guy's he's ingenious, isn't he? And that was, so he talked to you like that. That was pretty impressive for somebody to talk to you like that. And so he would teach me, and he would help me that way. I loved him. I still love him. He's an incredible person.
Yeah, pretty great guest to have on Golf Weekly last week. That is Chip Beck. The full piece available now on YouTube or on the brand new OTB Sports app. Is that what you tend to hear about Nicklaus all the time, Nathan? That he was obviously unbelievably gifted, but also just a gent?
Everything you hear about Jack Nicklaus is what a guy who has for someone who's been so successful, an incredible interest in other people. So we've had Conor Moore on a couple of times telling some brilliant stories about Jack Nicklaus. A year ago when he was on with us, telling the story of being at a corporate dinner with Jack at Jack's place, and telling Jack how Conor's dad was this huge fan, and then a couple of weeks later a letter appears from Jack Nicklaus to Conor's dad, just telling him how basically he was delighted to hear about him. And then this year, again, back at a dinner, again, what a life this guy is leading, Conor Moore, at the moment. Back at a dinner with Jack Nicklaus, chances his arm saying, any chance I could bring my dad? Yeah, no problem at all. Talking to Jack's manager, I've got a good seat for you. Jack is sitting, brings up Conor Moore and his dad and puts them at the table beside him for dinner, and just sits there interested. Like, that's the thing. He's not just doing this for show. He's actually, it seems, genuinely interested. So everything you hear about Jack Nicklaus is, that he lives up to the hype. And yeah, Chip Beck, I would advise people to go and listen to that. We had him for nearly an hour on Golf Weekly, and he's a major away, I think, from being one of the superstars of that era, because his life story is just incredible. He's the second player ever to shoot a 59 on the PGA Tour. He talks about that. 3 Ryder Cups, won all 3 singles matches. But not only that, first ever Ryder Cup, first time it's ever televised in America in 1989. The first morning he plays with Tom Watson against Ballesteros on Olatabal, and that's a continuing theme, because then 91 Kiowa Island, he plays with Paul Azinger against Ballesteros and Olatabal, and one of the most controversial games there's ever been at a Ryder Cup, and discussed that as well. And like, so close to winning a major. 4 times he won the PGA Tour, 20 runners-up finishes, including at the 93 Masters, and he was brilliant talking about that. Got a lot of criticism at the time. On the 15th hole, the par 5, He's 240 yards away, and he lays up, and he talked a lot about that and how ultimately he ends up splitting up with his caddy after that. Ken Venturi, who was on co-commentary, absolutely hammered him, called him a coward for laying up. And that sort of stuck with him for quite a while in his career. Now, he talks about why he didn't take the shot on, and basically how his caddy afterwards told Venturi that he thought he should have taken the shot on, which I guess is a pretty fatal breach of trust.
Yeah, T2 as well at the US Open in 86 and 89 as well. So very, very close to being a far bigger name than he is, but a fantastic interview and worth checking out. What is going to happen with the Ryder Cup, Nathan, now that you mentioned it there? Like, you had Steve Stricker coming out last week, was it saying that it's not going to be the same without the fans? It's actually a pointless exercise without the fans. Would you go that far?
Well, the Ryder Cup is the one golfing event you would think needs the fans more than any other. But Paul McGinley was on with us last week, and I would agree with a lot of what he was saying, that golf needs to get over itself here. That this attitude of Ryder Cup just can't happen without the fans. There's a lot of things we thought couldn't happen without the fans that are going to happen without fans. As he pointed out, Jordan Henderson's going to lift the Premier League trophy at Anfield in front of an empty stadium. None of these things are right. None of these things are as they should be. So why does golf think it's different? Now, maybe the potential is there. They push it back a year and it's this huge celebration in a year's time. But I don't think anyone thinks there's any guarantees that in 12 months they're suddenly going to be able to have an absolutely packed house every single day of the Ryder Cup. It's not to say, like, the Ryder Cup is built on the little bit of niggle that starts, particularly in America, and it builds and it builds. But that unfortunately isn't sport. We've seen already, even from the Tiger Woods, Phil Mickelson, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning match, that, you know, sports, once there's a little bit of a narrative and something becomes interesting, people can latch onto it. And I think that could happen in a Ryder Cup. So I don't think there's any reason to write it off just yet. Let's get through this first month of golf returning. The PGA Tour is back on Thursday at Colonial. Let's get through that, see what it's like, and then make a decision. But I would agree with McGinley that golf thinking that somehow the Ryder Cup is different to any other event in world sport, that it cannot go ahead without supporters, I think is wrong.
What's going to happen this week at Colonial? Is there anything to look out for other than the fact that it's just people back in the game? The whole nicey nature of what we've seen over the last 4 weeks is going to be out the window. You've got kind of a snarling Rory McIlroy back in the course this weekend, for example.
Well, you have an unbelievable lineup. You have the top 5 in the world. You pretty much have everybody playing this week, with the exception of Tiger Woods, who's going to hold back. I was surprised. I kind of thought, considering how COVID-19 is still rampaging through America, and even this week, Colonial's in Fort Worth in Texas, the numbers of cases and positive cases in Texas is skyrocketing. But all the players are obviously so desperate to get back out there. So it's the best field they'll have ever had at Colonial, and they put out some of the groupings already, and they've basically gone for it. One of the groupings, world number 1, Rory McIlroy, world number 2, John Rahm, world number 3, Brooks Koepka. Let's just put the 3 of them out there Thursday and Friday. So that's your Thursday and Friday entertainment sorted right there. There's going to be a little bit of competitive rustiness. There's no question about that. But a lot of these players have been playing a lot of golf, because obviously different parts of America have had different stages of lockdown. In Florida, certain counties never shut down at all. Certain players have been out and about. I know Rory McIlroy and Shane Lowry played a lot of golf together over the last few weeks. So yeah, those 3, it definitely whets the appetite. It is a strange thing, though, that everything's coming back, but that life is also returning to normal, because I thought a month ago that sport was going to be one of the first things back. So we'd still be in full-on lockdown. We still wouldn't be able to leave the house. We'd have nothing to do all day, every day, except watch sport. Yet now, like on Friday, the golf is going to be on Friday night. And I haven't seen my mother-in-law in 3 months, but she's going to come over on Friday. Now, luckily, she likes golf as well. She loves her golf, so she'd be happy to sit down and watch it. But I sort of had in my head, this first weekend of golf, I'd be sitting there, feet up, doing whatever the hell I wanted, like I've done for the last month. But now I'm going to have to, be somewhat reasonably well-behaved and polite. Like, this is what everybody's going, why don't we go over here? Why don't we do this thing on Friday night? You're like, well, I kind of had in my head, I'm going to watch a lot of golf. I'm going to watch a lot of football. I thought I would be able to watch every Premier League match without having anything else to do, where I fear now that may not be the case.
You're going to get invited to a house party or to a large social.
Don't go to house parties. Don't go to house parties. Socially distant barbecues, you can just about get away with.
You can just about get away with, like, I mean...
Don't you be a millennial and rooting for everyone and going to your house parties on.
I'm just saying that once lockdown and restrictions ease, Nathan, I like, basically your point is, can the government please roll back and put us all back into lockdown so we can enjoy the sport over the next... forever.
Well, kind of.
Forever.
Like, there is a fear of going back to normality.
100%. It's felt like...
Can we not just...
Let's
just watch the sport.
The last 2 weeks it felt like one long Sunday before going back to school after the summer holidays. But at least it's been long and drawn out, and it's not one sucker punch. But I do feel for your terrible, terrible situation this weekend, Nathan.
Like, there've been, yeah, you're dead right. Like, there've been no expectations on anybody for months, and now we get to go and sit down and relax and watch a bit of sport,
groom ourselves
every day.
Get a haircut.
We can't get a haircut. Ger Gilroy, I don't know if you saw this. I'm not sure if he's having a midlife crisis or what's going on, but he's gone with some sort of punk-style haircut at the moment. He let his kids cut his hair.
Oh, really?
You can check it. He has it up on his Twitter. You can have a look.
Oh, I didn't
see that's the danger. Like, this is a bit ridiculous now, to be honest. Now that I see it back.
I think you're rocking. It did shock me at 7:30 this morning. I'm sure it shocked everybody at home. But after a bit of time,
I apologise.
It is 8:51 on this Monday morning, and on Saturday's panel there was a great panel, great discussion about coaching and Irish football. It featured Republic of Ireland under-15 head coach Jason Donoghue, FAI head of coaching education Niall O'Regan, and women's football development officer Pearl Slattery. And here they are on the future of Damien Duff in coaching.
I'll give you a great story. There's another story in that game. Just got the job 2016. Real Doctor decides to come away with us. He's sitting in the stand in Holland. We're playing his home nation. We're 4-1 down. There's about 10 minutes to go. I'm looking around. I'm scribbling loads of notes. And I'm like, oh, God, what am I going to do? 4-1 down here. I go up and I start coaching the team more from the sideline, trying to keep them going, trying to get into it. You're talking about man management. I'm just trying to keep them because we need to play Holland again in 2 days' time, you know? So I go back to my bench and I turn around to Damien Duff. He's first time in with us. He's in for this. And I turned around to Damien. He's on his A licence. I said, what do you think we should do here? And he turned around and goes to me, don't be asking me. I'm here to learn from you, he says.
And he has learned, Niall. Niall, you were telling me that he's this guy's destined for the top.
Oh, yeah. 100%. We've had the pleasure of dealing with a lot of top people and a lot of top professionals. But as Jason said, IT proficiency, I've never seen a person as IT proficient as what Damien is. I've been in his own environment. The respect he has from the top row, the professionals, Scott Browns, these types of guys, you only earn that type of respect if you're a top person. And really, I genuinely believe, I've no doubt that Damien will manage at the highest levels in the Premier League and at international at some point in time, because he has it. He has the hunger, he has the work rate, he has the energy, he's the knowledge and experience. He has everything going for him.
Okay, so we're 9 days away from the Premier League's return, and we are recapping where every team currently is between now and then. So we've got a brand new slot called Best Case, Worst Case, and as it pretty much says at the tin, we're going to be giving the best possibility or the best outcome for every team in the Premier League, and also what is the worst that could happen to each team. We're going to do 3 or 4 a day. Today we are doing Arsenal, we're doing Aston Villa, and we're doing Bournemouth, and our expert, as ever, is going to be Nathan Murphy. Arsenal is where we're going to start, Nathan. 9th in the Premier League, 5 points off 5th. What is the best that can happen?
Well, the best that can happen, obviously, is that they end up finishing inside the top 5, which should, if everything goes as it is with Manchester City, be enough for a Champions League place. It's remarkable to even think they're in that. This is an Arsenal side who won 5 games in the Premier League in 5 months, yet somehow have been able to hang on in there. Mikel Arteta is most definitely still in the honeymoon period. It feels as though any little victory, any little improvement, he gets huge credit for. But any bad result, anything typical Arsenal is seen as, well, that's just the old Arsenal. It's going to take them a long time to get rid of that. They need to qualify for Europe. They obviously took pay cuts very early, pay deferrals. All of that is built on them having some sort of success. Getting that money back is built on them getting success and qualifying for Europe. I think it's a huge task, considering you look at the fixtures they have between now and the end of the season, to see them finishing 5th. Their first game back is against Manchester City. They have to play Liverpool. They've got a North London derby against Tottenham. So best case scenario is they go on a ridiculous run. Mikel Arteta will have had a lot of time at the training ground with the players, and he's got all his points across. Worst case scenario is they end up finishing 9th or 10th. They are in serious trouble financially, you would expect, considering their revenue, matchday revenue last season was 96 million, if that's not going to be there next season. And you look at their best players. So they have one world-class player in Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who has just over a year left in his contract. Now, this week there seems to be a suggestion he may extend. But either way, Aubameyang's 31 in June. It was a bizarre signing in some ways, because they spent over 50 million at the time on a 29-year-old from Borussia Dortmund. But like, if they're going to sell, how much value is there now in Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang at that age? Are they going to get anything back? He's clearly their world-class player, 17 goals this season. He is everything clicks through him. The other real quality player they have at the moment is Bakary Saka, who just before the lockdown was showing real promise at left back. Covered the game against Everton, one of their last home games before football stopped. And when he got on the ball, Arsenal just looked a totally different side. But again, he's got just over a year left in his contract. So it's just it's the same old story from an Arsenal point of view. You just hope that Arteta, with time on the training ground, can improve these players. But they still need a massive overhaul. Individually, you go through that team and you could probably improve on 8 or 9 of them. The entire... Certainly right back in the 2 centre halves, they probably need to improve, unless Bellerin with this break again can get back to where he was.
Is Mesut Ozil leaving part of the best case scenario?
Possibly, but you never hear much against Mesut Ozil from the other players.
True.
And again, so it will save them money on wages, considering he's on a colossal wage at the club, but it's not like they're probably going to be able to reinvest that money. As you say, if they're looking at free transfers and potential loan deals, like, are you looking at Mesut Ozil going, well, from Mikel Arteta's point of view, and it may be out of his hands, well, if I let this guy go, am I going to be able to get anyone to replace him? Maybe I'm better off just having him here. Like, there are still flashes, there are still times when he does look like the genius we thought he was going to be, while generally he frustrates. But like, that will be a decision a lot of managers will probably face of, all right, I can let this player go, I can sell this player, I can move him on, but am I going to be given any funds at all to replace him with a player of anywhere near similar quality?
And you think that because of the fact that there will be little to no matchday revenue, that the answer to that question is a very firm no from Arsenal's perspective?
I don't think so. I'd be shocked. It would go against everything we know of Arsenal if now was the time they were to start spending big. Unless Mikel Arteta was given all sorts of assurances when he took over, and somehow they remain in place, that they would invest and he would get the money. But there have been signs of improvement. Unquestionably, defensively, they've been a bit more organised. But I just think individually throughout that team, even in the middle of midfield, like Granit Xhaka, I don't think he's ever going to win back the Arsenal supporters. Torreira and Guendouzi are 2 very good young players, one of whom you would hope would develop into a true quality player, but they need somebody beside them. They need somebody to bring them along and show them the ropes, and that hasn't been there so far.
And Torreira has been furthering his ambition to play for Boca Juniors and wants out of the club, and he was linked with AC Milan last year. Like, the worst case scenario here is not just Arsenal failing to qualify for Champions League or failing to qualify for Europe, because let's not forget they're in 9th position at the moment. It is the legacy of what that brings and just the exodus from the club. And it kind of is a drip feed, Nathan, isn't it? It's not necessarily the first season you're out of the Champions League, as Arsenal discovered. You can hold on to a few stars. It's when you're out of the Champions League for 4 or 5 seasons and you get known as a non-Champions League club, which Arsenal are on the periphery of now. They really are on the outside looking in when it comes to the elite competition in Europe.
Yeah, well, I remember Rory Smith wrote an interesting article on this last year about the perception of what's a Champions League club and what's not when it comes to attracting players. So where Liverpool have managed to change it now over the last few years and would very much be seen as a club you can go to and be guaranteed to play Champions League football, Arsenal, Manchester United, Tottenham aren't. So, and it's hard to see Arsenal getting back into that mix anytime soon. The worst case scenario doesn't really bear thinking about from an Arsenal point of view, because you say massive collapse in revenue. If they were to lose Aubameyang, again, lose 2 or 3 more players and not to be in a position to replace them, it will be a long, long way back, because Chelsea, as we've seen, are improving. Liverpool aren't going to go away. Manchester United, it seems, are going to spend despite all of this as well. So Arsenal are reliant, it seems, on Mikel Arteta becoming a managerial genius. And if that doesn't happen, what else have they?
Let's move on to Aston Villa. They are in 19th position, 2 points from safety. What is the best case scenario for Villa?
Well, survival is the best case scenario. 2 points of safety.
How likely is that?
They do have a
give
game
us
in
percentage
hand.
points here on the relegation likelihood.
I just don't think everything I've seen of Villa this season. I don't think they have the quality to stay up. I don't think they have enough good attacking players to stay up. They are going to be the beneficiaries of the break with players returning from injury, as a lot are. And there's some interesting Premier League meetings happening over the course of this week as well about what happens if there is a second spike and what happens if football needs to be stalled again. What happens if they don't get to finish this season in terms of is there relegation? If the championship doesn't finish, it seems a lot of the clubs down the bottom half are saying, well, if the championship doesn't finish, let's not have promotion and let's just stay as we are for next season. But the one thing that's clear when you start looking into it, like, there's going to be an unfairness no matter what happens. I'd imagine clubs are going to have to agree, if the season does finish, that they don't take any legal action, because there were so many players who should have missed the rest of the season who are now back and available. And like, you look at Aston Villa, someone like John McGinn, crucial player for them in the middle of midfield, should now be back for the rest of the season. Tom Heaton, Wesley, even though he hasn't done a huge amount so far, if he's the player who goes and scores 6 goals in the last 9 games, that might be enough to keep Aston Villa up.
Is that not, Nathan, is that not just the case of there being no football, that there will always be a good bill of health when there is no football? A lot of those injuries are actually just wear and tear or pulling up in the middle of games. Like, I get the long-term injury thing, but like, is that not just, can you really take legal action on that front?
If you're losing a guaranteed revenue of 120 million a year, I'd say you're going to explore every possible avenue. I think there'll be a lot of what ifs come the end of this season. If this hadn't happened, if that hadn't happened, because there are so many. Like, the obvious one would be Tottenham with Harry Kane and Heung-min Son suddenly coming back into the mix for the remainder of the season, having been in all likelihood going to miss it. But from Villa's point of view, listen, if they can survive, it'll be a massive achievement. Is it going to be enough? The big question of, would it be enough to keep Jack Grealish? Maybe Villa are the beneficiaries of straightened wallets and tightened wallets that actually Manchester United can't go and afford to buy him right now, that they don't have to sell. So, but if they go down, there's no question Grealish is gone. The question now is, if they stay up, can they keep him?
Yeah,
certainly highly unlikely in March.
The worst case scenario is
better chance now.
It's fairly obvious that they go down and they lose Grealish. It's a double whammy that is definitely going to happen. So what is the chance of him staying if they stay up? Like, automatically they don't need to sell for as high a fee, and as you say, in the current climate, it could be something that deters a Manchester United. I
still think he'll go.
Right.
I still be very surprised if Jack Grealish was at Villa next year. He's too good.
Okay, well, that is Aston Villa. It's pretty clear-cut what the best and worst case scenario is. Same with Bournemouth, to be honest. They're in 18th. They're in the drop zone on goal difference, so perhaps you'd give them a higher chance of staying up. The best case is they stay up. The worst case is they go down. But you've been saying that the fitness cards have fallen in their favour over the last little while as well.
Well, they've had horrific injuries. They've had over a dozen players out for certain games, and the key players as well, who were so crucial to their success last season. So David Brooks, a brilliant young Welsh player, has missed pretty much the entire season. He's now back. And last season it was Brooks and Ryan Fraser playing in behind Joshua King and Callum Wilson that made them such a brilliant attacking force. They haven't scored a lot of goals this season. They've been, like, you look at the expected goals, they should have done a hell of a lot better. Things just haven't fallen right for Wilson and King. But Brooks been back could be an absolute game changer. And Eddie Howe maybe just been out of the spotlight again, having a little bit more time, because he did look like a manager who was short in ideas, who was starting to really feel the pressure in those last few weeks. That only 1 point from their last 4 matches, dropped into the relegation zone on goal difference. You just think actually everything calming down, getting a bit of time back in the training pitch, having the vast majority of their players fit. I think they have the quality. I think in Brooks, Fraser, Wilson and King, there's no question they have the quality to score enough goals to keep them up. The one issue maybe is the fixture list. They don't play any of the bottom 6 between now and the end of the season, so they don't have too many of the relegation 6-pointers. They have interesting games to start, though. Palace is their first match back, then they've Wolves, and then they've Newcastle. Like, if you can take 6-7 points from those 3 games, they'll be fine. The worry for them would be, like, while there's huge pressure on those sort of 6-pointers, somebody's got to win them. So if all the other teams are playing them, somebody's going to be picking up points somewhere or another. And if you're not, Bournemouth has to start quickly. They've got to get these players back firing on all cylinders, and they've got to pick up points from those first 3 matches.
It sounds like you're pretty hopeful for them to actually stay up, given how good the fitness bill looks at the moment. In the worst case scenario, if they do get relegated, like if you look at Aston Villa's owners being cash rich and being able to perhaps within the realms of FFP get them back into the Premier League pretty soon, is Bournemouth the opposite, where they could start to plummet?
It feels like they're two clubs to be run slightly differently, though. Like, part of the problem for Bournemouth has been when they have spent big, they've got it wrong. It's hard to think of too many success stories. And again, how many of those quality players are you going to lose? So Callum Wilson was a player who was a strong link with a move to Chelsea in January. Could he go? Brooks. Fraser is out of contract in the summer. He's almost certain to leave the club. Nathan Aki, another player who you'd expect would go. But Bournemouth, like, remember, this is a club with a stadium of capacity of 12,000. It's a club punching way above their weight. If Eddie Howe wanted to stay on as a championship manager, he could stay on. There's no doubt about that. Suspect he'd probably feel his time has run its course and maybe he needs a break, and maybe Bournemouth need a change as well. I don't need to be as great a panic at Bournemouth. They could probably go back down to the championship. There wouldn't be an outrage from their supporters. They would feel, okay, let's work our way back up to the big time. Whereas Aston Villa, we know, is, a European Cup winning club, a giant club whose supporters expect to be in the Premier League, and there would be ramifications for a lot of people around the club if Villa were to go straight back down again.
I'm really getting the sense this morning that this kind of feels like a new season. That, like we're talking about...
Yeah, but then, like, has the Bundesliga been a new season, or have things sort of continued as they were? Like, the slight difference, like, what happens with Liverpool? So Liverpool win the league, say, 2 games in. Are they going to be going hell for leather for the remainder of the season? Like, Jurgen Klopp's going to say, of course we are. We want a record points total. Maybe they do. And maybe it's in their best interest, actually, to get everyone back up to full fitness. There's going to be, a month's break between the end of one season and the start of the next. So you keep them at a very, very high level and you keep that momentum going. Or actually, if you think, you know what, some of these guys have played a lot of football. And are going to have to play a lot of football over the next while. Let's give them a break while I can. Let's do a little bit of squad rotation. Our team's suddenly going to pick up points at Anfield where they wouldn't have normally. So, like, certain teams aren't going to improve dramatically overnight, but there is an opportunity for a team like Bournemouth in particular just to reset. They've been out of the firing line. Nobody's really spoken about them for 3 or 4 months. So I think there's a big opportunity for them. And yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it's like this little mini league for the next, what is it going to be, 6 weeks? Enjoy it. Whoever gets a bit of momentum, like that'll be the talking point afterwards, that this team somehow managed to conjure up some sort of momentum in the space of 6 weeks and it saved their season.
Listen, I'm loving Monday mornings where momentum can be a real thing on OTB AM. Gerald will sit here and discount momentum as this unreal thing. So thank you, Nathan, for making my day better today. Momentum, a real thing, and it is what is going to be the thing that keeps an Aston Villa or Bournemouth in the Premier League. Right, just after 9 o'clock, well, it's 7 minutes past 9 on this Monday morning. We've got plenty coming up this hour. Enda McGinley and Orla Bannon join us next for Tyrone's Mt Rushmore. Tyrone are going to be the 20th county that we've done in our tour of the country, and you can listen back to every single episode right now on the OTB Sports app. Now, as part of our World Cup Revisited series, we look back at the 1978 World Cup in Argentina this weekend. It is one of the most fascinating tournaments for all the wrong reasons. Dan MacDonald explains.
Yeah, like that's an extraordinary story. Just to roll back a small bit, I mean, it is like there's a brilliant piece by a guy called David Forrest, and he's involved with the In Bed with Maradona website. I think it was reproduced in The Guardian a couple of years back, and he was in Buenos Aires a couple of years back. I think it was like the 40-year anniversary of the World Cup. And actually if people decide to look up the footage of this after our discussion and they look at the YouTube clips or whatever, you might notice that at the goals, the goals all have a black sticker at the bottom of the goalpost. So the white goalposts are all, it's a perfectly shaped, goalpost and crossbar, but at the bottom there's a black sticker on either side of the net. And this author wondered about it for years. Like, what was the story with this black on the goalposts? And he essentially did this piece, David Forrest's piece. He sought to find out the reasons behind this. He went to the ground, went to a museum. He was talking to a waiter in a restaurant one time who said, "You should go and see this person." And they went to the stadium, and they got a tour, and they asked someone about the pictures and said, "What's the story with that little black at the bottom of the goalposts?" And they said, "Well, we can't really talk about this." but here's someone you should ask. And it turned out it was the waiter back in the restaurant who sent him to the stadium, who was part of the ground staff in 78. And effectively, because the regime actually was pretty clueless about football, they only become interested in it in the month or so before the tournament, really. That, you know, they were sort of very keen, as you mentioned, for propaganda reasons to present the best image. And the thing about the goal nets and the shape, there was, you know, the ground staff wanted to make a protest. They wanted to reflect the fact that people in Argentina weren't happy. They thought about carving stuff into the pitch or whatever, but they'd all be killed for that. They'd be taken away and thrown out of the plane. So they decided to tell the regime that it was a football tradition to put these black stickers at the bottom of the goalpost, but they were actually symbolising a black armband. That's what it was. And it was like the ground staff's little gesture to the world that something wrong was going on in Argentina, and people there understood that the black at the bottom of the goalpost was their mark of respect for the people that were being tortured and killed. And also, like, not far from the ground as well. This was the thing. These torture camps were in the centre of the city. You know, they were not out in the countryside. I mean, the shouts, you know, were almost drowned out by the cheers from the stadium. So, I mean, it was a horrendous time. And it's funny, you give that opening speech, John, there, just about the political situation and the dictatorship and, you know, what a country this was. And you're thinking, yeah, this is all the ingredients for a place FIFA will bring a World Cup, you know, because that's generally where they bring World Cup.
And it was Havelange's first World Cup. It was João Havelange's first World Cup, but it was given to them in the 60s. But he did nothing about it. It was all, we don't get involved in politics. And they were also starting their kind of road towards, what was this? It was a mixture of corporate sponsorship. It was a mixture of global TV, and they didn't want to rock the boat because they had eyes on Spain, they had eyes on Mexico or Colombia in '86, and let's just get this done. Oh, we don't interfere in politics. And that's a very noble thing, but when you see how FIFA then ended up, then you'd have to say that.
But it wasn't noble. It was rubbish. No, it was a lie. I mean, the organizer for the competition was assassinated.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
beforehand, and I mean, Havelange's politics would have been, questionable. I mean, Brazil, who won it in 1970. I mean, Brazil was a dictatorship at that time too, and that was, you know, Havelange came from Brazil and that football background. So, I mean, FIFA knew what it was at.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio. OTB Sports Radio.
Here at OTB, we're not just about sport. Our man Richie McCormick knows his tunes. Every day at midday, Richie will be bringing us his isolation mix. It's an hour of music to help you switch off from the workday, even if you're working from home. Stick on the mix, get some fresh air, and take a walk while remembering to keep your 2-meter social distance, of course. That's Richie's Isolation Mix every day at midday on OTB Sports Radio. Listen on the Go Loud app or at offtheball.com/radio.
Missing this?
Salah takes the shot. Oh, Mo Salah with one of the goals of the season. Unbelievable.
Then get this, the all-new OTB Sports app. Off the Ball, Ireland's premier sports channel, now has a new home, featuring the biggest names in Irish and world sports. Podcasts, interviews, news, commentary, analysis, plus almost 20 years of sporting archives. All free and ready when you are, at home or on the go. The new OTB Sports app. Download it now from the App Store and Google Play.
You can say it's grand. It's not grand if you're not on it, though.
OTB AM's Mt Rushmore.
It is time for Tyrone's Mt Rushmore. We've got Enda McGinley and Orla Bannon with us this morning to chat through the contenders and pick the 4 heads on the mountain. Folks, you're very welcome.
Morning.
Morning.
For anybody who's just joining us for the first time, this is how it's going to work. Enda is our OTB selector, and then Orla is the OTB challenger. So Enda is going to give us 4 names on our Mt Rushmore for Tyrone, and then Orla will come along and replace one with one of her own decisions. We will both hear you out, of course, and I understand, Enda, you've been chopping and changing a small bit with your initial 4 list. The pressure is getting to you, basically.
See, whenever you're making the initial call to people to get on to this, you need to put a health warning with it. it seems such a straightforward thing, and then you start delving down into it. And then yesterday morning I was out on a bike ride and 4 other boys with us, and it kept us going for about 45 miles trying to tease us out. And so I sent a few text messages this morning, and I think I might have changed again. So leave it with me. I'm going to make this up as I go along. I think is going to be the way we're going to go this morning.
How set are you in your thinking, Orla?
Yeah, I'm sorry for Enda that he's agonised. Sometimes you can put too much thought into something, man. Just go with it. I came to 3 sort of fairly quickly. I have sort of agonised over the 4th a little bit, but I'm more interested to know how his hair's looking so well. He looks like he's just straight out of the hairdressers, and I know, or the barbers. I know they're still closed. Some of us are struggling here.
Tell me about it.
Enda, we might as well get straight into things then. If you're putting one person up on the Mt Rushmore, I'm sure there is one name that comes to mind, especially from a GAA perspective.
Yeah, there's probably maybe 2 in that sentence, but there's one for me. There's Peter Canavan has to be there. He's a club mate of mine and a good mate of mine, even though he dropped me in a charity challenge over the weekend. But he is iconic. If you want sort of a true icon of his sport, then Peter is that. If you want a leader of men, then Peter is that. If you want somebody that has achieved the greatest honours in the game, then Peter is that. If you want somebody that for me represents a lot of what is good about our county and for me represents the best of us, then Peter was that. Despite his greatness, he remained humble. He was good crack. He could enjoy. He was very much a man of the people, and yet he could lead in a way that wouldn't have been strange to the likes of Roy Keane. He was a driven individual and had a huge amount of influence both in the 90s and in the noughties, and even still. His influence is just massive in Tyrone.
Explain to us that drive, Enda, because I think we can all appreciate just how amazing a footballer he was. What was he like as a man and as a person to share a dressing room with?
Yeah, he was amazing. So I had watched him growing up, like as a young fella at the club. My parents had us all at pretty much every Argyll League game, and right through the 90s, you got to see this man day in, day out at your local pitch. So you really got to appreciate what he was about. I think the big moments in Peter's career, obviously 95 he shot to national stardom. He led Tyrone. The legend thing is he carried Tyrone on his back that year to the All-Ireland final. He would disagree with that, but it was the 96 semi-final with me, that infamous one where Peter took the injury to his ankle. That left a mark on Peter, and that left scars on Peter, not just the ankle. And as I started to play along with him, so I started with my club with him at 98, I started playing senior football with him. That was my first time. I mind he wasn't able to start in our first club championship game. I was starting, was only maybe 16 at the time, 16, maybe just turned 17. And everybody else in the dressing room was coming up, a young fella in the dressing room, wishing me all the best and saying, look, have nothing to fear, and all that lovely words of encouragement. Peter just came up and with a driven word, he says, you are lucky to be in there, now make it count. And he was driven, it was scary. It wasn't as if I had this sort of free pass to go and play how I would want to try and play. He made it clear that in his mind there was expectations and I'd better live up to them. And that was the sort of ruthlessness he brought. His famous line about nasty wee men. Every man that shared a dressing room with Peter, probably from 96, was about the nasty wee men, and that's because Peter had talent to burn. Everybody's seen it, but he had an edge to him and a fight with him that was chiselled out in the likes of that Meath 96 team. And for the group of Tyrone boys that came through in the noughties and went on to win the All-Irelands, and we'd won our underage All-Ireland titles, Peter and his experience of 96 and how he led us and how he stripped away this sort of notion of being able to win stuff with just nice football. He made it very clear from his own experience that you had to have a harder edge, and through that driven mentality, he influenced that entire generation of Tyrone men. He influenced my own club massively, obviously. So he had all the talent to burn, but he, through his own experience, realised that wasn't enough. Not in Gaelic football, that's not enough, and it's still not enough. You have to be able to bring the battle, and that man had a battle burning within him that was massive, and it was for everybody that got to play alongside him. You knew you had to measure up first and foremost in that regard, and then not make a mistake in the skill end, because he wouldn't be long letting you know.
And that battle that was burning inside him, and at the club, I don't know if you've heard stories of when he was a kid and when he was coming up through the ranks. Was he somebody at 13, 14 was the boy wonder that everybody knew was destined for the absolute top? Like, you talk about the talent levels. When did it all start to come together from, do you know?
Well, I suppose, I suppose that time I would have been very young at that time, so you weren't acutely aware of the politics going on within our own club. Our own club had a split for 8 or 9 years, and Peter was in the section that had broke away when he was young, and so he missed out on his youth football. But his talent was, from what I've heard about it, his talent was such that there was a push then to get the club back together, because we realised this guy needed a platform and he needed to be playing for Tyrone. And he was playing initially for Tyrone under the Killyclogher hurler tag, famously. But the club realised that there was talent there, and as long as the natural need to heal those rifts, there was this impetus of a generational talent that was Peter. He had very talented brothers, older brothers, but Peter was and is just something special, something different. We've all seen great players, and there's lots of them, thankfully, gracing their fields, have done in the past. But then there's certain players that are just different in how they play, different in how they move, a different skill set that is almost impossible to replicate. Peter was one of them very, very special men. So, from a club point of view, there was a huge influence in getting the club back together again, simply because of Peter's talent.
Just the last one on Peter, and it's interesting that you make the comparison between him and Roy Keane, because in the Sunday Times yesterday, Wayne Rooney says that the person you're going in to impress in the Manchester United dressing room in his era was Roy Keane. It's not the manager, it's Roy Keane. And it sounds that this is a similar situation, that Peter Canavan is the man you wanted to impress, and perhaps you were lucky that you had the opportunity to do it at club level before doing it at county level.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, at club level, like, I remember so often, especially in the earlier days, before you got fully comfortable with playing, you never truly got comfortable with him. It was one of them things, you were always acutely aware that you were playing with Peter Canavan, and whilst he always acted as a friend and I would count him as a friend, he is still Peter Canavan, so there's still that wee aura about him. And so often, if you'd done something half decent in the match, or you played a good pass to him, you know, the old thing, you'd get a wee hand up or a wee thumb up, or after he would score, he'd come out and acknowledge the good work that you'd done to set him up. There was nothing from that from Peter. It was very much a jog back out, and it would be, well, you'd literally just done what you expected to do. If you didn't, if you made a mistake, he was on your back. There was no sort of wee bit of encouragement or sort of always positive. It was pretty demanding, but it was them standards he held himself to. The same thing as Roy Keane. It was them standards he set for himself, and so you tried to play to them as best as possible. And of course, whenever he was able to do what he was able to do, it was still a pleasure to be on the pitch.
Orla, I presume there's going to be no arguments here on Peter Canavan.
Definitely not. I suppose we talk about numbers today, numbers 1, 2, 3 and 4, and they are just numbers, but I think you would have to say Peter is not just going in as number one. He's definitely going in as first, because he sums up everything that you would want Tyrone to be. And, you know, just when you talk there about that the players maybe wanted to impress him, you know, I think, and Enda will know better than me, that story of, you know, at half-time in the Kerry game in 2003, when he was clearly hurt and said to the boys, look, I'd never ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do myself, but I need to ask you to do one thing today, get me to an All-Ireland final. And the guys apparently, you know, charging for the door to get back out to play Kerry again. I mean, he just, you know, talk about in Tyrone still, you know, there are Tyrone fanatics. It's football mad county, Tyrone fanatics, but there are Peter fanatics, and the Peter fanatics are still very large in number. He's just a much loved figure. And you know, I suppose even when, you know, Tyrone won the first All-Ireland in 2003, there was you know, genuine warmth from all around the country. People were delighted, mostly for Peter Canavan, because he was recognised at that stage as the best footballer ever, you know, to have won an All-Ireland. People were genuinely pleased all over the country for Peter Canavan, first and foremost, that he got what his talent finally had deserved. Now that goodwill seems to have dissipated a bit towards Tyrone over the years, but it was certainly very much in evidence in 2003.
It's interesting then when you think about the fact that Enda talks about how great he was in '95, and then a full decade later, in 2005, he is still the key component of Tyrone winning an All-Ireland. And you have to credit Mickey Harte for a little bit of magic dust for taking him off and putting him back on again. Is that for you one of the most iconic moments from Peter Canavan? Maybe not his best, but certainly one of the most famous, given the whole substitution and the kind of cloak and dagger nature of it all.
Absolutely, but that was in 03. That was in the final against Armagh that Mickey pulled that one out of the bag, something that I certainly hadn't seen before. It was an inspired move by Mickey, and just got the Tyrone fans and players going just at a time when you're maybe starting to doubt, can we get over the line? Everybody knew Armagh at that time were fantastic finishers. They were physically so strong. They finished games always so well, and maybe doubts were starting to creep into the minds a little bit. But when Peter came back on, he just took control of the situation. But in 05, as he says, well, you had obviously that moment in the semi-final with Armagh, the free kick, and as Oisin McConville has said many times, he knew it was over. Once he saw the ball going into Peter's hands, he said he just turned away, because he knew, he said, if there's one man ever that you want to be standing over a free kick in that situation, it is Peter Canavan. He said he just turned away, and he knew where the ball was going. And then in 05, that goal in the final, you know, when you think that Diarmuid Murphy hadn't conceded a goal all year, and then the left foot, to pull one out with his left foot like that, so low along the ground, what a ball in by Jordan to Mugsy, what a fantastic goal. And that, you know, when he just put his hands up, it was like, you knew it was a swan song, but what a way to sign off.
Without question. I don't think there's going to be any arguments from anybody on Peter Canavan. Very much the number one selection there. If we do go in order of preference, and who would be your second strongest case in terms of your argument for this Mount Rushmore?
Come on, the order of preference is tough. I'm going to chuck in Darren Clarke then, as number two, because again, his achievement on a national stage in an international sport has been massive, and the character too. He's a very much loved character. I think he imbues quite a bit about what makes Tyrone people so great, in my non-biased opinion. But his level, I suppose, obviously his Open triumph was the biggest moment for him. But I think what best captured Darren Clarke was his relationship in the Ryan Cup. Consecutive appointments as a member of the European Ryder Cup, then as non-playing vice captain, and then as captain in that. The Ryder Cup is sort of golf's team thing, whenever that camaraderie and that ability to mix with your peers and be popular with your peers. And I think if anything speaks volumes of Darren Clarke, his skill as a golfer is obviously well recognised, but his nature as a man is best recognised, I suppose, by that Ryder Cup influence.
Yeah, it's hard to see how you could have a Tyrone list without Darren Clarke. His list of achievements is quite staggering, and maybe at times with a lot of our golfers, because there's been so much Irish success, you forget about some of it. Like world match play, beating Tiger Woods in the final at the turn of the century, when Tiger Woods was at his absolute peak. It was seen as an absolute shock. And you look at the caliber of players he beat throughout that world match play, like Paul Azinger, Hal Sutton, Mark O'Meara, the best of the American golfers, hard men. And then to take Tiger down, at the time it was a sensational story. Obviously winning an Open Championship at Royal St. George, I think anybody who wins a major championship has got to be on their county's Mount Rushmore. But the thing that separates Darren Clarke is the Ryder Cup. 5 times a player. And 2006, the only time so far the Ryder Cup's ever been held here in Ireland, less than 2 months after his wife Heather had died, to turn up, to play, and to play as well as he did. And it's still, I think, one of the most iconic moments in the history of Irish sport, when Clarke arrived at the first tee, and the sheer emotion of not just the thousands upon thousands at the K Club, but everybody watching on TV as to how he managed to get up there and hit that first tee shot, and then be such a key part of Europe going on to win at the K Club, and the celebrations and everything that followed. So many moments from that week stand out because of Darren Clarke. So I would agree with Enda. I'd imagine for you as well, Orla, Darren Clarke was a fairly straightforward decision.
Yeah, absolutely. When you say that Ryder Cup, when you think he was a wild card by Eoin Woosnam, but I mean, even though it was just 6 weeks after his wife Heather had died, it didn't seem like a gamble at all. I mean, I think he contributed 3 points that week. But obviously the Ryder Cup is what he will be probably most known for. But even that open win, you know, when you think that he not blew it in '97, but he did lead after the first 2 days. And at Tyrone, and then Justin Leonard came through in the last day and won, and you thought, oh, you know, you didn't really think possibly that he would ever win an Open, and that was the one he wanted. But it all came together, and that was an incredible time for golf here. When you think it was the third in sort of 13 months. We had GMAC winning the US Open in 2010, and then just a month before, Rory won the US Open in 2011, and you know, it just to have 3 major winners in 13 months, it was an incredible time, and it was, you know, it was fantastic the way he won it. He'd had, you know, top 10 finishes in the other majors, but that was the one he wanted. So I think as long with all the Ryder Cup stuff, that weekend in Royal St George's, I think definitely will stand out, but certainly he has to go up there.
We're halfway through.
That's the other thing, sorry. You just have to remember with Darren Clarke heading into Royal St George, his game was gone completely for a couple of years. So to turn it around, and I think he needed that victory to be on this sort of list for his greatness, because Darren Clarke will be seen after Rory McIlroy as the most talented golfer to come out of this country. And obviously he knows how to enjoy his life, and he's enjoyed his success. And his press conference the morning after in Royal St George will attest to that, when he arrived in straight from... I've been up all night, having a thoroughly good time. But in some ways, despite everything he'd previously achieved, we could well have been talking about Darren Clarke as someone who could have done more. But because he won that Open Championship, I think it cemented his greatness.
Absolutely, because otherwise he'd have been in the category maybe of a Colin Montgomery or a Lee Westwood, you know, someone who sort of was always there or thereabouts, but didn't get over the line. He needed that to, as you say, to cement his greatness. So definitely, I think he had 21 pro wins in his career as well. You know, not to be sniffed at, but as you say, that win over Tiger Woods as well was incredible. When Tiger was really at the peak of his powers, I think he, you know, and he beat him quite well, like, you know, maybe 4-3 or something. You know, it was pretty convincing in the end.
Yeah, it seems like consensus for Darren Clarke, consensus for Peter Canavan. So we're midway through and not a single argument so far. So we're doing well, folks. Enda McGinley, you're next up with your third pick. Who's it going to be?
Not an argument so far. I'll just have an argument now, with just even with myself. So I've got a page down here in front of me and about 8 names, and I've now 2 slots left. So I'm going to go with my third slot. I'm going to go with Willie Anderson, actually. And then we'll argue about the fourth slot. So Willie Anderson, he's originally from 6 Mile Cross, wee place out not far actually from where I am. Rugby man, Irish captain for a period, and some brilliant stories. Doing my research on him, some brilliant stories. But a man that has left a huge legacy in Tyrone and in Ulster. And in Ireland, in terms of how he carried himself, his own persona, and what he's brought to the game afterwards. So I'm going to give Willie Anderson a nod. There was, from a rugby point of view, there was Chris Farrell would deserve a mention at present, and David Humphreys personally, or in the past, in the more recent past, than Willie Anderson obviously achieved a huge amount too. But I'm giving the rugby nod, if there's going to be one, to Willie Anderson.
What sort of anecdotes have you stumbled upon?
There was one, and my whole thing, I wanted to try and get away with this, from this cliche of Tyrone being fairly aggressive, and even when I was talking about Peter, was going back to his aggression, and Willie Anderson, then I was hoping this might get us away from our aggressive look, but then I seen that he was one of the few to decide, when faced with the New Zealand haka, to actually go and face them down and take on the haka and go into the midst of them. So that doesn't exactly make us look very normal. And then I also read about a tour when he was 24 in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and he got locked up for a couple of months under the military junta down there when he stole a flag from a building. So unfortunately, the Tyrone cliche is going to live on for another while.
Orla, how big did he feature in your thinking? And what about rugby in general? I know that your third pick, anyway, is not a rugby pick, but if you just focus on rugby for a moment, was there anybody else that came to mind?
Well, I suppose if we're going to start claiming people who were born here, even if they maybe necessarily didn't spend a lot of time here, I mean, Jacob Stockdale was born in Newton Stewart, so I think maybe what a season he had in 2018, the season to die for, but he possibly a little bit early in his career to be considered for that. But no, I mean, Willie Anderson, was fantastic. Willie's a great lad. I mean, he's absolutely brilliant. Even to this day, he's just the same. He's always the same, no matter what. And what he's given to Ulster Rugby over the years. I know he's signing off now at the end of this month from the academy, but he's much loved there as well, and has had a great influence on a lot of younger players who I think we'll be hearing a lot more in the years to come.
For sure. I think Armagh would have something to say about the Jacob Stockdale intervention there somehow. We might actually, before we get into the debate about who's going to make it and who's not, we might go straight on to your fourth pick. And I'm not sure if you have made your mind up about who is pick number 4 in your Tyrone Mt Rushmore, but if you have, you may as well give it to us.
So I was going to spread the love, and I was going to think of Dennis Taylor, snooker champion, his famous black ball final in 1985. You had go soccer with Aaron Hughes, who's a huge number of caps in a very prolonged season at Premiership level with Newcastle, which is obviously a massive level. But for me, I'm just going to stick to my bias and think Tyrone as a county. I think if any county's going to have 2 GAA and a dominance of GAA, then it has to be Tyrone. And then it's a who, and that's where it starts getting difficult. So if Brian Dooher, Mickey Hart, Frank Mulgigan, Eugene McKenna, you can go way back to the likes of Iggy Jones from the past, but I suppose for me it came down to from again personal bias and allowing for personal bias between Dooher and Mickey Hart. Both men obviously hugely iconic, will always be remembered in Tyrone in different ways, but have had a huge say in Tyrone's current standing and in just the Tyrone attitude about themselves. Dooher for me is a player in every way that Canavan is up there, Dooher is up there, and my original pick would have been to have Peter and Brian there just together, and that's trying to leave aside some club bias and not having 2 Ergel men on the Mount Rushmore. But hearing that the likes of Brian McAniff, Jim McGuinness was there in Donegal, Sean Boylan and me, then can you really leave Mickey Hart out? I'm not sure, so I'm going to give the nod to Mickey Hart just because you can't separate him from what Tyrone have achieved during the noughties, which has really set Tyrone up as a county as it is at the minute.
I'm surprised he wasn't the automatic pick actually when it came to GAA. Of course you can't ignore Peter Canavan's talents. Just another word on Mickey Hart then, Enda here. Like if you talk about Peter Canavan being that Roy Keane figure in the dressing room, was there a similarly imposing style to Mickey Hart at the start? A good intimidation almost when you start working under Mickey Hart?
It was strange because he had us as a bunch of young boys. The crux of that, if we're starting saying 03, the bulk of that 03 team was made up of the minor lads that he had from 97 and 98. And then on the 21s, and because we were very young at that stage, and Mickey was a teacher, and he had a good teacher-like authority over a team, and he had Father Gerard McAleer with him as his number 2. It meant all of us. They were very straight-laced squads. Everybody had to toe the line. There was no messing about. Anybody that's ever got into an argument with Mickey Hart will know that that's not a place you go to and survive. So you learned very early that he was the boss, but he was never an overly domineering force in the dressing room. And I remember then come 2003, he very much used the likes of Chris Lawn, Brian Dooher, Peter Canavan, boys that had been there before, and he didn't run it as an authoritarian thing. It was very much a collective team unit. Now, he always had his way that if he was angling at a certain tactic, so we'd have a team meeting and there'd be maybe a video clip shown or something discussed, and Mickey would have an outcome that he was looking, he always got that outcome. It was always put out to the team and it was always discussed and teased out, but it somehow always ended up with an outcome that you knew sort of Mickey was looking at from the start. So whilst he knew what he wanted and he did get his way, he didn't rule it as an authoritarian manager. At that stage, it was very much a collective effort and putting the responsibility back on the players from a team work point of view on the pitch to a decision-making point of view on the pitch to always making up your own mind and doing something different on the pitch. I remember that as a distinct lesson, that he was always trying to get boys to do something different on the pitch, a wee bit different than maybe where the game has went now, but it worked with that group that he had at the time. So I think as a manager, he was perfect for that group, and because he had us from a young age, he had already moulded us into his vision by 03, and so he was just working with us, and there was never any animosity between the players and Mickey. There was never any rows in the Tyrone camp. People thought we always keep it indoors, but it literally never happened in my 10 years with the squad under Mickey. That never happened at all, you know. So he had a massive influence. I think he's well read. He's big into sports psychology, and I think he used that a lot. He planted little seeds and used little reminders, and through that he had almost complete control of us mentally, without ever trying to force us down a certain route. He had sort of manipulated us into this collective ethos of a team that went on to achieve great things. The biggest thing Tyrone were overcoming at that stage was a huge barrier of no previous success. But he had us mentally attuned from we were 16, 17 years of age that was never going to be an issue.
Right, so your final Mt Rushmore Enda is Peter Canavan, Darren Clarke, Willie Anderson and Mickey Hart. We know that Peter Canavan and Darren Clarke are dead certs at this point because yourself and Orla Bannon both agree on that. But Orla, over to you. I'm not sure if Willie Anderson or Mickey Hart feature in your mountain. You might actually just run the rule over who else is in consideration.
Well, I also, I suppose, agonised over the, Mickey and Dooher, and then also Frank McGuigan was featuring very heavily in my thoughts, just probably because that was a name you heard, when I was growing up in Tyrone. Frank McGuigan was the name you heard all about, from breaking through as a young fella, I think 73 winning the Ulster title, and then he went off to America, came back, and then 84 the Ulster final against Armagh, everything that he did, the 11 points, the 5 off the left foot, 5 off the right, the fisted point. I mean, that one of the most iconic performances ever. And I suppose for a long time he probably summed up everything about Tyrone in terms of, it was a bit of what a talent, but there was so much kind of unfulfilled promise, and it was that sort of frustration that Tyrone had to struggle with for so long until the Enda's era came along. But I actually was feeling a wee bit sorry for Enda there when he's talking about Peter and Mickey, because you think, apart from maybe clubs in Kerry and Dublin, any other player like Enda sitting there with 3 All-Ireland medals, I mean, the club grounds would be named after you at this stage, but he's sitting in the same club as Peter and Mickey. So unlucky there, but yeah, I mean, those guys all featured heavily. Aaron Hughes was another one, actually. He didn't make my 4, but someone who very much was in my thoughts. You think he had 112 caps for Northern Ireland. He broke the record for the most outfield caps, which I know Stephen Davis has since overtaken, but just 7 sort of Pat Jennings, and what an iconic name he is. But Aaron Hughes was, Cookstown boy, played for Newcastle, Villa, Fulham, all of that. But I suppose I better go on to who I did pick, and someone who hasn't been mentioned and who is in my 4 is Shirley McKay, the Ireland hockey player from, she's from Drumquin, just about 7 or 8 miles outside of Omagh. I think she had a birthday at the weekend there. I think she turned 32, but Tyrone is not a hotbed of hockey in any shape or form. But when you think that Shirley McKay is Ireland's most capped female sports person ever, with 305 caps, I mean, what she has done is nothing short of outstanding. When you think of the sacrifices that she had to make to, nobody near her. She had to, I think her mum Hazel told the story about Shirley sitting in the back of the car doing her homework as she drove her to Dublin, or she drove her to Belfast to train with girls more of her standard as she came through. So to come through against all of that, no facilities really of the standard that you need, no teammates of the standard that you need to be playing with around you. You have to travel for miles. So and she's come through the pain, I mean, of losing all those Olympic playoffs. I mean, she's been through 4 Olympic cycles now. They lost, I think that not sure who the first was. It the first one, China maybe, but I mean they've lost in that shootout. The shootout then as well against China actually was the last one. That was awful for 2016, and to come through all those 3 Olympic setbacks and then to go to the World Cup and get that silver medal. I mean, incredible what they did, and then to follow that up as well then and qualify for this year's Olympics with that. The dramatic, obviously, that weekend against Canada, obviously terrible for the men, but the women got there, and now you think they've been postponed because of the virus. I mean, I'm sure some of them are wondering, those girls, are we ever going to get there? But hopefully they will. But Shirley McKay, an incredible, you know, she's a great sort of, you know, when you just talk to her, you can just see the determination in her, and she definitely has had to fight through against all odds to do what she's done. I think even if she was Dublin or in somewhere else, to have got 305 caps coming from Tyrone, a place where a hockey wilderness. I mean, I just think it's incredible to be Ireland's most capped female sports person ever. Hats off to Shirley McKay.
I'd imagine you could probably take the female out there, Orla. I can't imagine there's any men that have more caps than her. She's probably Ireland's most capped sports person, I presume.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sure. I can't think of anyone anyway.
Yeah, no. Neither can I. It's a fairly strong case, Enda.
It's a very strong case. It's that strong that I'm sort of just looking at the list and saying, right, who's out, to be honest. I think we should still mention Dennis Taylor's final just for the sheer magnitude of it back then. I remember an old song about it too. It was a song from a childhood that I remembered, but that black ball final, supposedly snooker's greatest ever match, they would say. So again, I would like to point out that Tyrone usually involved in some pretty good stuff, from Darren Clark's great finals. Our Tyrone team was in good finals. Dennis Taylor snooker, best match ever, with that black ball final, 17 frames apiece with Steve Davis.
And Dennis Taylor will look iconic on a Mount Rushmore. He's just got the glasses, you know who it is.
Glasses alone, very recognisable, and so that we wouldn't be big into vanity. You might be surprised to hear we wouldn't be big into vanity and looks and Tyrone, but Dennis Taylor certainly was a style icon in his own way back then. But no, I think the case Orla has made for Shirley McKay, like coming, was it Drumquin you said, Orla?
Yeah.
Like for people unaccustomed to Tyrone, Tyrone has about 2 main roads in the whole county. It's a very big county and there's a lot of back roads in it, and Drumquin would be at the back of the back roads. So to travel from there to Dublin and Belfast for your sport is just immense, and to not only do that but 305 caps is just like, that's just mental stuff. So yeah, overlooked her, so she has to go in. I can't axe my 2 GAA places. I'm not going to do that. So unfortunately, I'm gonna axe Big Willie, and I'll not say that to his face.
I wouldn't advise it. So that's your revised list. So what we have been able to do here is actually allow the selector, once they hear the challenger's argument, make their own voluntary change to their mountain, and that's exactly what's happened here. So Enda McGinley's revised list is going to be Shirley McKay, as well as Peter Canavan, Darren Clark and Mickey Hart. So it is one change on top of that, Orla, that you can make if you were going to wield the chisel. Have you decided that Frank McGuigan is going to be your 4th pick if you had to pick your own Mount Rushmore?
No, I don't think so. He came very close, but he didn't quite make it. So sorry. So Enda has voluntarily, because that was going to be my enforced change. Shirley McKay to me just had to go up there.
Yeah.
So have you now just taken that power away from me, Enda? Is that what you've just done?
Perfectly open-minded, Orla. Perfectly open-minded. You've made a good case. I like that. We went that way.
It's great. This is one of the most diplomatic ones we've ever had. But you also now have your enforced change, Orla. You still have another wild card, should you wish. I mean, you could look at Canavan, Clark, McKay and Hart and say that's one fine-looking mountain and leave it at that. But the floor is still there for you to bring in Frank McGuigan if that's what you want.
No, I mean, I think Dooher was very close there as well. But if it was to make an enforced change, it would have been to have Shirley up there. So no, I think I'm quite happy with that. I mean, who am I to take Mickey down to put Dooher up? Absolutely not. No, I'm quite happy with that. I think that's a pretty good selection. And you know what? When we started this process, I have to say, I thought, well, outside of the football, who else have we got? And it was only then when you start actually go through to go, actually, there's a lot more than I thought. So you've left me feeling quite warm and cozy and positive about sport in Tyrone, thanks to this process.
And it's not just all negative, right?
I can't believe we've gone through this entire thing. And like, you could argue, you could make a case considering Tyrone were the team of the decade for the first decade of this century and how brilliant they were. As you were going through all these Tyrone greats, maybe it was an oversight. Nobody's mentioned Sean Kavanagh.
That's a good point.
Footballer of the year, arguably in a variety of different positions, the best player in the country for a considerable period of time, had to have been in the mix. Why Sean Kavanagh not when you talk about Canavan and Dooher? Why does Sean Kavanagh not come into that conversation?
Because within that group, he wasn't the leader in the same way as that other man. Like when you're going to Sean Kavanagh, for me in that group, you're also looking at Hub Hughes, Brian McGuigan, Stephen O'Neill, Conor Gormley, Philly Jordan, Racey McManaman. All of them boys were massive players. Sean was a big player within that team, but he wasn't like, he was no bigger than the rest of them men, if you know what I mean. So Peter and Brian were on a different level, both in terms of their playing and in terms of their leadership. Like Brian, why I wanted to put him was, like, as much as Peter was as skillful and everyone else, Brian was that other bit of Tyrone that for me was the work rate and that sheer effort and will to win. Dooher, I'll never forget the 2008 All-Ireland final. Is probably something maybe not recognised by most, but that iconic point that he scored where he ran up along the Cusack stand side and put it over with the outside of his right, that game, maybe 15 to 20 minutes into that game, up until that, I remember clearly 3, maybe 4 instances, the 3 or 4 previous times that Dooher was involved in that game, he had mucked up, and that wasn't Dooher. He had got either beat to the ball, or he had fumbled, or he had give away a pass, and that was not Dooher. And even as a player on the pitch, I was looking thinking, crap, like Dooher never makes a mistake. So, God, he made a mistake. That's not like Dooher. Then next time he's on the ball, oh crap, something's happened. And Dooher was the sort of man, if something did happen like that, you made in a special effort to make sure you tried to get it back, because you didn't want anything to happen on his responsibility, if you know what I mean. And so he had got off to a mare in the All-Ireland final, 15, 20 minutes in, literally nothing had went right to him. The classic attitude then is to just get a foothold in this game, do something really simple. Next time I get the ball, hands on the ball, make 100% sure of my possession, and simple pass, or do the simple thing. Just play my way back into this game, get a foothold in it. What did Dooher do? Took off on a 60-yard solo run down the Cusack stand and pin it over with the outside of his boot. And I remember for me as a player looking at that, and I just thought, that man is like nothing else I have ever played with. He is just different gravy. And so that for me, along with a treadmill experience that taught me a lesson one day down in the City West Hotel alongside Dooher. Dooher for me was just something else. So I'm sad that he's not on the wall, but sure, I suppose my personal Rushmore, he's there.
You'd have to say as well, he was the prototype for the utility footballer. He had number 10 on his back, Mick used to say, but he numbers on the back mean nothing. And he was the one, he was everywhere, doing everything. I mean, you think he bore the scars of '96 as well, and what he had to come through. And as he would have said himself, not possibly the most skillful footballer, but my God, he maximised. He got every last ounce out of himself. He squeezed everything out of himself and left it all out there on the field. So I think, when you start, Sean obviously was an iconic player and part of that, but he is in that group with McGuigan and Ricey and Conor Gormley and Philly and Muggsy and guys like that. But I think Peter and Dooher were incredible, and a 2-time All-Ireland winning captain as well.
That's remarkable. I honestly think that if people outside of Tyrone were to compile their top 5 Tyrone footballers, 90% of people, maybe that's an exaggeration, but a lot of people would have Sean Kavanagh ahead of Brian Dooher. It's remarkable the adoration with which he attached to him, and even kind of calling him as a utility forward kind of sums up perfectly how we view him. But as you say, and the kind of like the points with the outside of the boot, an unbelievably skillful footballer, which nobody really gives him credit for. And maybe that is the perfect epitome of that Tyrone team.
Dooher came through, and I think in '96 Dooher was only maybe 19 or 20, and he won Ulster All-Star, maybe a nominee All-Star that year as well. And he was a hugely skillful player. The fact is, he put the team first. put his work rate first, and rather than just want to do what he could do as a ball playing forward. Like, he was one of our best forwards, but he literally sacrificed himself and his body. Like, what he put himself through, only I suppose those that maybe shared a dressing room with him fully understand. The man was granite, and he just put himself through hell, and he had more skill than the vast majority, even of that illustrious group of footballers that we've named. Dooher was one of our most skillful footballers, and yet people know him purely for the fact that he put himself through hell on a football pitch for the team. And again, as a player, as a proud Tyrone man, that's an image, that's a sight, and that's a reputation that I would be always proud to have associated with Tyrone. So that's why Dooher is just, and he's quiet, he's unassuming, he's as humble as get out. Orla would say, like, from a media point of view, he's hilarious to interview. A, you struggle to understand him. B, he's not going to talk to you anyway. But he's Tyrone's. He is something unique to us. And in terms of a man that you would go over the ditch for and fight for, Brian Dooher's one of them.
Did I miss the treadmill City West story?
Oh, I will never forget it. So we were staying down in the City West of a team weekend, must have been a training weekend, and then got up early in the morning. I would have been more the studious types and headed to the gym in the morning. And when I walked into the gym, and there was Dooher on the treadmill already running with his iconic style, which always made him look wrecked. So I don't know how long he was on the treadmill at this stage, but he looked wrecked. So I thought, okay, I'm coming in fresh. I'll come up on the treadmill. Now, the treadmill, I would have to say, Dooher's treadmill looked more like a Stairmaster at this stage. Such was the incline on it. Like, this thing was, I don't know what percentage it was. I always used to run at a 1% on a treadmill, but he must have had it at about 10. And he just was running away, Dooher's classic run, as if he was just wrecked on his last leg. So I pulled up beside him on the treadmill, started up, went at a similar pace, but at a much more sensible incline. And that was grand. 10 minutes in, started to get out of buff. Sort of, I was expecting just a wee light warm up in the morning. 15 minutes in, started, right, this is a meaty workout now that I'm taking on. By about 20 minutes, I was ready to stop, really, but in my head I was thinking, hang on. I came into the gym, Dooher is at a stupid incline. He was running before me. I can't stop before him. So I thought, right, I can't stop before Dooher. So I kept on going another 5-10 minutes, and by that stage I was beat, and I just slowed down the treadmill. Right, Dooher, I'll see you later. Right, Enda, that's all right. And I left the gym, and there he was, battering away, same incline on the treadmill, and I walked away thinking, that man doesn't know pain. That man is just, his body is not programmed the way a normal body is. But so ever since then, I sort of knew there was no beating Brian Dooher in terms of the physical pain stakes.
Yeah, he would ordinarily make plenty of other counties, Mt Rushmore, as I dare say, but he's just missed out on this occasion. The final list is Peter Canavan, Darren Clark, Shirley McKay and Mickey Hart. Where is it located, Enda? Where is Mt Rushmore going to be?
Hey, I have a house on the side of the Clogher Valley, and I'm looking over. I can see the Mourne Mountains, I can see Slieve Gullion in South Armagh, I can see into Monaghan, I can see into Fermanagh. So there's a patch in my garden, and them four faces can sit in it absolutely fine.
You happy enough with that, Orla?
Not at all. I mean, I'm presuming, and that this house is also in the Paris. Would I be right? So you want not only do you want.
No, that's perfectly fitting, Shirley.
So you want two heads up there, and you want it in Errigal Care? No. I don't think so. I would put mine on Pigeon Top, which is a very elevated, beautiful spot as well, just outside of home. If you ever want a nice walk, that's a place. You can see mountains all around us. It might be facing Derry, though. That might be a problem. Not too sure. Might have to.
We found that facing as many counties as possible tends to be the key to a good location. Listen, Orla and Enda, thanks a million for engaging with that this morning. That is it for Tyrone's Mt Rushmore.
OTB AM's Mt Rushmore.
It is 9:57. This has been OTB AM. A pretty solid list. Nathan, I think you do raise a fairly valid concern about Sean Kavanagh there. We almost went without missing him, and it's amazing when you listen to somebody within Tyrone talk about Brian Dooher. I just think our view on what actually means so much to Tyrone people is a little bit off. We obviously just can't judge it as well as they can.
Well, also, I think Enda probably summed it up there. Dooher didn't really look like your average great footballer.
No.
He was always a bit different. he looked like someone who could run forever, but you'd forget about the skill, the talent that he had as well. So where Sean Cavanagh looked like your modern footballer, he looked like, he was physically very, very imposing. But it's fascinating to hear Enda say how Canavan and Dooher were just on a totally different level. Again, the greatness of a list is often by who's not on it. So for Dennis Taylor not to make it, considering what he achieved, and again how iconic that World Snooker Championship victory was in 1985, I think is, it's maybe a little bit of a surprise. They could have gone for 3 footballers.
They could have gone, like I think you're bang on in thinking Sean Cavanagh there, but obviously they would have gone for Brian Dooher over anybody else. Like, it's hard to ignore Shirley McKay with the amount of caps that she has for Ireland, and I think a lot of us kind of didn't realise just the volume of caps she had, and you can't leave her off as a result of that. You can't leave Darren Clark off, obviously, and I really don't think you can leave Peter Canavan or Mickey Hart off. So I think in terms of Mt Rushmore being correct and actually just getting everybody right, like I hear what you're saying about Dennis Taylor, but I think the other cases are just too strong.
I just want Taylor's glasses on Mt Rushmore.
We haven't had too many people, respectable people on our Mt Rushmores at this point.
Yeah, I think we need to go through. We'll need to start doing a list of the various types of people who are on it. What is the commonality of all our people who are on Mt Rushmore? Like, we can go through. We could do a real deep dive after this. Public school, private school, hair, no hair.
Well, we haven't
glasses, no glasses.
We haven't gone to Dublin yet, which is going to be a key indicator on that front, I dare say. It also depends hugely on who's actually selecting it. But with 20 seconds left this morning, it's probably not the thing we should get into. Nathan, it's been a pleasure. We'll chat to you tomorrow morning. You're with us for the next couple of days on OTB AM. On OTB tonight, it's the football show, Monday Night Rugby, and the news round from 7 o'clock. If you've just missed anything from this morning, then you can watch it back or listen to anything back through the OTB AM podcasts, and you can download the OTB Sports app and subscribe to OTB AM and get it every morning. We timestamp it for you so that you can skip through to whatever part of the show you want. So today we obviously had that Mt Rushmore of Tyrone, we had the sports pages, and we have plenty of football too, from the best case, worst case scenario of Arsenal, Villa and Bournemouth, and also the story around Timo Werner's future and what that means for the European football market. OTB AM live every weekday morning from 7:30 AM. You can also listen or watch the show live on the OTB Sports app, as well as all the other usual places. We're back tomorrow morning. Bye-bye for now.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.